Chapter 1042. Immediately, the resplendent glow was suppressed viciously, circling several meters around the monk king of the seven treasures. The figure of Duobao Rulai behind him shuddered as well, as if it could collapse at any time. The dauntless monk, and the unraging monk exchanged glances. Their eyes were filled with shock. They had no idea how to describe their current feelings with words. Then they looked at Little Anne together. Little Anne's eyes remained as calm as ever. There was no complacency on his face at all. He remained humble and polite. "Master of the seven treasures, this is my Buddhist treasure. Please guide me." The monk king of the seven treasures was no longer in the mood to respond to her. He powered the seven Buddhist treasures as hard as he could, charging left and right. The 33 golden prayer beads revolved, but they did not continue to press down. Instead, they allowed the monk king of the seven treasures to destroy the formation. In order to hide the cultivation of the path of white bone and great beauty, the skeleton demon formation was not able to unleash its full power, but it still easily suppressed the monk king of the seven treasures. No matter what he did, he was unable to shake it at all. The red sun rose up in the east slowly. Time passed by slowly. The monk king of the seven treasures' forehead became covered in sweat. He was no longer in high spirits like he just now. He was filled with worry. Everything before him had exceeded his imagination, such that he still struggled to accept it. Little Anne suddenly took a step forward. His right hand landed on the hilt of the blade on his waist. As he walked, the skull prayer beads pressed down slowly, like a mountain pressing down. It was unstoppable. Li Qingshan was slightly surprised. She wanted to use vexation severing? If she used vexation severing, the dauntless monk would definitely recognize it. How was she supposed to explain it then? Little Anne arrived before the monk king of the seven treasures. The skull prayer beads had already pressed down on a radius of several meters around him. The figure of Duobao Rulai collapsed loudly. Under his shocked gaze, the blade flashed like snow. "Don't!" The dauntless monk stopped him loudly. No matter how much he loathed the monk king of the seven treasures, he could not allow his blood to actually splatter across Great Buddha Mountain. Otherwise, how was he supposed to face all the Buddhists in the world? The Lingua Temple would never just let the matter go. But everything had happened far too quickly. He was actually unable to stop it in time. In the blink of an eye, the glow of treasures, the Buddhist glow, and the blade all vanished. The seven treasures monk king sat on the ground, his expression fluctuating. Sometimes he frowned in contemplation, sometimes he was vexed and remorseful, and sometimes he smiled happily. Little Anne sheathed his saber and stood there quietly. "Could this saber be?" the dauntless monk exclaimed. The moment the vexation-severing blade was drawn, he had clearly seen the blade's appearance. Although the vexation-severing blade had already been lost for many years, every single curve was clearly engraved in the minds of the past abbot. They dared not forget it, nor could they forget it. The impact it had on him was even greater than the 33 Buddhist prayer beads. "Trouble-severing blade. What do you think?" Little Anne waved his right hand like a willow branch, and the skull prayer beads returned to his wrist. "So this is the trouble-severing blade. It is indeed mysterious. Seven treasures thanks me." Seven treasures monk king stood up, put his palms together, and bowed deeply to Little Anne. "Master, you don't have to be so polite." Little Anne stepped aside. "What a waste of my several centuries of cultivation. I was caught up in greed, but I didn't even realize it. I even became arrogant and committed the sin of lying. It's all thanks to your strike that I was enlightened," the monk king of the seven treasures said in shame. If it were not for the fact that he knew about the wondrous power of the trouble-severing blade, Li Qingshan basically would have suspected that Little Anne had smashed the monk king of the seven treasures' head. The effects were basically perfect. If he took action, killing the monk king of the seven treasures would be easy, but he would definitely make a great enemy out of the Lingua Temple. Even if he failed and did not kill him, the monk king of the seven treasures would definitely return in resentment. He would gain another enemy from then on. Li Qingshan had never been afraid of falling out with people, but he hated trouble. Little Anne's strike really did seem like he was cutting off his troubles. "I'm returning to the Lingua Temple for secluded cultivation. Farewell." The monk king of the 7 treasures let out a long sigh. Take care, seeing your brother's 7 treasures. The dauntless monk was in a hurry to ask about the trouble-severing blade, so he was in no mood to make the monk king of the 7 treasures stay. Before he left, the monk king of the 7 treasures said to Li Qingshan, even if you're not a demon king, you're definitely not a Buddhist. The crown prince of Xiqing's grievances with you run as deep as the ocean, so you better take care of yourself. Don't worry, master. All men have their revenge. I'll cut down a clown like him sooner or later, Li Qingshan said. The monk king of the 7 treasures glanced at Li Qingshan deeply before saying to Little Anne, the bestowment of the monk king will arrive very soon. The gates of the Lingua Temple are always open to you. Only then did he take off. Compared to when he came, he seemed much more discreet. One will, where did you obtain the trouble-severing blade? As soon as the monk king of the 7 treasures had left, the dauntless monk asked in a hurry. Dauntless abbot, this isn't the place to talk, Little Anne said. As a result, they arrived in the grand hall. Little Anne drew out the trouble-severing blade again, and passed it to the dauntless monk. The dauntless monk accepted the trouble-severing blade with both hands. His mind was in turmoil, completely drawn away by the blade in his hand. He murmured, sure enough, it really is the trouble-severing blade. He could not be blamed for being so excited. The trouble-severing blade held far too great a significance to the Chan monastery of Devanaga. Even 10 Buddhist treasures paled in comparison. The blade was given to me by the Golden Cicada Spirit King, said Little Anne. The Golden Cicada Spirit King. Only then did the dauntless monk shift his eyes away from the trouble-severing blade. He frowned slightly. This was a name that the Chan monastery of Devanaga could never forget. Why did he give it to you? He used the chant of Devanaga as an exchange, said Little Anne. You. The dauntless monk pointed at Little Anne. If a regular disciple were bold enough to pass on the supreme cultivation technique of the Chan monastery of Devanaga to the Golden Cicada Spirit King, he would directly capture them. Even if he took back the trouble-severing blade, he would still punish them heavily. I've violated the sex rules. Please punish me, abbot, said Little Anne. Forget it. You've done a great service to the Chan monastery of Devanaga by retrieving the blade. You can say your merits make up for your faults. The dauntless monk hesitated a few times, but in the end, he still waved his hand helplessly. Rules and precepts were important, but they had to be flexible. As the abbot, he still had to consider the Chan monastery of Devanaga's 10,000-year-old heritage first. There was no reason for him to destroy his own foundation. And upon further thought, if the Golden Cicada Spirit King offered him something like that, he would have to consider it. With Little Anne's identity and cultivation, he already had the right to make a decision like that for the Chan monastery of Devanaga. Thinking like that, he felt much better. I'm not just exchanging for the blade, added Little Anne. What else? The dauntless monk asked. And the soaring locust king's life, said Little Anne. What? The Golden Cicada Spirit King is about to ascend soon. I've already told the soaring locust king about this. Little Anne's explanation was simple, but none of the people present were stupid. They immediately outlined a rough plan in their heads. The soaring locust king's hatred for the Golden Cicada Spirit King ran extremely deep. When the Golden Cicada Spirit King ascended, the soaring locust king would definitely stop him regardless of the consequences. As long as they cast down an inescapable net, they would definitely be able to kill the Golden Cicada Spirit King. Perhaps they could put an end to the millennia of grievances between the Chan monastery of Devanaga and the Golden Cicada Spirit King. Li Qingshan looked at Little Anne in surprise. This had already completely deviated from their original plan. If everything really went according to their expectations, they could completely remain uninvolved and watch the great cultivators of the Green Province surround and kill the soaring locust king. They would not have to take any risks at all. Chapter 1043. The dauntless monk hesitated. He wanted to say something, but he hesitated. Little Anne immediately understood. He smiled. Abbot, do you want to try the power of the trouble-severing blade too? Yeah. Who doesn't have troubles in life? The dauntless monk shook his head with a smile. Little Anne said nothing more. He swung the blade in a backhand manner, and the hall was illuminated by the blade, before rapidly returning to its darkness. The dauntless monk brought his palms together, and stood where he was, without moving at all. Only a while later did he open his eyes in praise. "This blade really is wondrous. Come, come, come. There's another one here." Li Qingshan placed his hand on the unraging monk's shoulder, and called out to little Anne, "I have far too many troubles. I can't cut them down, so it's fine if I don't cut them down. It's just like how people stop itching when they have too many lice, and they stop worrying when they have too many troubles." The unraging monk swatted away Li Qingshan's hand and chuckled. "The master is wise, so you obviously don't need the assistance of an external object like this," said little Anne. "I've already called one lamp over. He's only a step away from the third heavenly tribulation, so he happens to be in need of this blade," said the dauntless monk. The unraging monk did not need it, but the thousands of disciples of the Chan monastery of Devanaga did. After personally experiencing the wondrous power of the trouble-severing blade, he had already formed a picture of this in his head. All of the disciples of the monastery would be free of worries, and their cultivation would advance drastically. "All right," said little Anne. The dauntless monk mentioned a few more names in thought. They were all renowned figures in the monastery. People would always have some troubles in life, and the troubles of cultivators were not necessarily any less than those of mortals. In particular, mortals could live with their troubles, but cultivators, especially Buddhist cultivators, would struggle to advance their cultivation if they could not put an end to their troubles. If their troubles ran too deep, they would turn into inner demons. The trouble-severing blade was basically a savior that had descended from the heavens. Even if little Anne did not inherit the position of abbot, he would still possess an extremely great status as the wielder of the blade, not to mention his startling strength. Standing before the dauntless monk, he no longer seemed weak at all. "Senior brother, worries are Bodhi," the unraging monk said suddenly. If a person had never encountered any trouble since birth, then they definitely did not possess so-called intelligence. If they did not possess intelligence, then even if their troubles were temporarily severed, they would definitely return very soon. It would all be for naught at the end of the day. Amitba junior brother is right. I was too happy. The dauntless monk rearranged the list in his head, greatly reducing the number of people on it. He secretly made up his mind that the trouble-severing blade could only be used to save disciples who were deeply troubled, almost turning into an inner demon. Before long, the people on the list arrived at the Hall of Great Strength. Li Qingshan noticed that some of them were strong and some were weak, but they all looked miserable. An old monk, in particular, looked like a patient with severe depression. His eyes were sunken, and his face was ashen. In comparison, even the ugly face of one lamp was more pleasing to the eye. "Abbot, why did you summon us here?" Monk-eating asked. "You've all been plagued by troubles, which has affected your cultivations. One will just happen to retrieve the sect treasure of our monastery, the trouble-severing blade. You can give it a try," said the dauntless monk. The monks were all excited and surprised. The trouble-severing blade. Is it really that trouble-severing blade? Didn't it end up in the hands of the golden cicada spirit king? Another person asked. "Though, Abbot, the trouble-severing blade is the supreme treasure of our monastery. It won't be that easy to control, right? You don't have to worry. One will has already undergone the third heavenly tribulation. She'll be conferred the title of Monk King soon." The hall fell silent. Everyone's gazes gathered on little Anne, who did not know what the two words Monk King meant. The dauntless monk said, "If there's anyone who doesn't want to rely on external objects, and wants to resolve their troubles with their own willpower, please take a step back." A while later, not a single monk took a step back. The dauntless monk nodded in satisfaction. At least they all knew their limits. "There's no need for you to feel that relying on external objects is shameful. I've just tested the blade myself, and the monk king of the 7 treasures from the Lingua Temple has benefited tremendously too. Although the effects of the trouble-severing blade are only temporary, as long as you remember the feeling of that split second and maintain a clear mind, it'll definitely bring great benefits to your cultivation." As a result, the monks took turns stepping forward to receive little Anne's strike. Li Qingshan watched on from one side and sighed inside. She really has changed. On the left shoulder of Great Buddha Mountain, in a quiet monastery, Li Qingshan pushed open the moon gate and gazed at the rising and falling mountains in the distance. However, he felt rather unsettled inside. Suddenly he turned around and asked, "You finished severing them all?" "Yep." Little An stood quietly under the Bodhi tree in the courtyard. "That's good." The courtyard suddenly fell silent. Only the moonlight shone down quietly. Li Qingshan organized his words, but he had no idea how to start. "Qingshan, are you blaming me for changing the plan on my own?" "I'm not blaming you. You're doing this for my own good. However, we owe the Golden Cicada Spirit King a debt of gratitude. Aren't you biting the hand that fed you?" Li Qingshan frowned. He had always been a person who kept clear tabs on his debts of gratitude. But Little An's plan had sold out the Golden Cicada Spirit King as well. It went against his principles. Little An strolled over to his side and leaned into his arms gently. Helping the Golden Cicada Spirit King successfully ascend is also part of the plan. "What do you mean?" "We have two objectives. The first is to help the Golden Cicada Spirit King, and the second is to kill the Soaring Locust King. However, the Soaring Locust King isn't that easy to kill." Li Qingshan nodded. A great demon king with no bottom line was far too disgusting. "But if the two of us work together, we should have a 70 to 80% chance of success." "No, it's not that high. I'm the greatest variable. The Green Province is not the sea." When the Golden Cicada Spirit King undergoes his tribulation, it'll definitely draw the attention of all the great cultivators. And once I unleash the path of white bone and great beauty, the Buddhist sects of the world will no longer tolerate me. I'll definitely be treated as a great enemy by the Chan Monastery of Devanaga. It might even lead to a chaotic battle, but I'm unwilling to kill a single person from the Chan Monastery of Devanaga. And if the Golden Cicada Spirit King wants to ascend successfully, it's very likely that the Chan Monastery of Devanaga will be an obstacle only second to the Soaring Locust King. I believe the dauntless abbot hopes for him to die with the Soaring Locust King the most. So instead of leaving it up to fate, it's better to reduce the number of variables as much as possible. I've already told the dauntless abbot that the Golden Cicada Spirit King is willing to risk failing his ascension to destroy the Soaring Locust King. The Golden Cicada Spirit King has done that in the past, so it won't be difficult for him to convince others. He's also handed over the affliction-severing blade, so you can treat it as him taking the initiative to make peace. I believe the dauntless abbot will make the correct choice. Little An's eyes shone with a wise light. Li Qingshan was immediately rendered speechless. Not only did her plan give them greater confidence in killing the Soaring Locust King, but it also gave the Golden Cicada Spirit King even greater assurance in his ascension. It also did not require them to fight for their lives. And it was grand and honorable. She did not let down the Chan Monastery of Devanaga, the Golden Cicada Spirit King, or even him. Chapter 1044. You just don't like to think about these things. Little An smiled. I've already prepared myself for a great battle against the Soaring Locust King. You sure know how to ruin my plans. Li Qingshan pinched her nose, half blaming and half doting. I just want to help you avoid as much trouble as possible, Little An said, feeling wronged. I know, but you should discuss it with me first in the future. Sometimes the simplest and most effective method is not necessarily the best method. No trouble means no challenge. My path is about advancing bravely, not hiding in the shadows and scheming. Sigh. I suddenly understand what it means to be troubled. Looks like I didn't eat the fruit of wisdom for nothing after all. Little An could not help but laugh. She bit her lip and said, Yeah, I promise. Li Qingshan lowered his head and kissed her forehead gently. The red mole between her eyebrows was still as clear as ever. But her appearance had already changed from that of a confused child to that of a beautiful young lady. Her petite figure had become slender as well. Most importantly, she now had her own ideas and thoughts, which both comforted him and made him feel slightly melancholic. You'll probably be staying here for a few days, right? I want to participate in the entire plan. Fair enough. I'll make some time to pay a visit to the Sword Collection Palace and draw out the sword they owe me. Although the treasured sword of the Sword Collection Palace was already indispensable to Li Qingshan, it would be a waste if he did not want it. He could even take some revenge on the Sword Collection Palace. So why not? The Sword Collection Palace. Little said in thought. What's wrong? Nothing. You're stuttering again. Oh right, since you've recovered your memories, just who did this to you back then? Was it that Ming Fei or whatever? We have to avenge her. It's hard to say. Little shook her head. She was also slightly doubtful. It's not like we're in a hurry. Once this is over, we'll investigate it properly. I don't care which bastard did it. I'll drag them out one by one, and let them bleed. As Li Qingshan said that, he was about to set off north. Little refused to let go and said gently, We'll leave tomorrow. All right. Thus, the two of them quietly embraced each other, gazing at the boundless mountains under the moonlight. Although they did not say much, they had a tacit understanding. On the top of Great Buddha Mountain, the dauntless monk watched this from afar and frowned a few times. In the end, he let out a long sigh and returned to his meditation room. He considered the person he wanted to contact this time. Of course, Chu Lai King was number one. King Chu's mansion. The steward of the prince's mansion led the two through winding corridors and arrived in front of a quiet little building. Before the steward could speak, the door suddenly opened, and a middle-aged man walked out. He was dressed in a green luxurious robe and held a book in his hand. He looked at the two people behind the steward indifferently. One of them was a short old man with a face as black as charcoal, and the other was a slender woman with a face as white as jade. The woman's cultivation base was obviously a level higher than the old man's, but she was very respectful towards him. They were Ru Xian and Hua Xiai. Hua Xiai and Ru Xian, from the School of Medicine, greet your majesty. Chu Lai King asked. I heard you have a way to deal with the locust plague. I do, Ru Xian said confidently. You're not human? Chu Lai King squinted his eyes slightly. He could tell that Ru Xian possessed the presence of other folk with a single glance. He found it strange that he was unable to immediately determine which race she belonged to. Is that important? Ru Xian answered with a question. Answer honestly. Whether it's important or not isn't up to you to decide, the steward scolded. Is this how the king's estate treats talents? Ru Xian had seen much of the world, so she obviously would not be frightened by a steward. Instead, Hua Xiai seemed rather uncomfortable, but it was not all that obvious with his dark face. Talents. There's not a single honored guest of the king's estate below the third heavenly tribulation. The corner of Chu Lai King's lips curled into a sneer that was not particularly obvious. Then your majesty can just let them deal with the locust plague. We'll be taking our leave, Ru Xian said. All right. Tell me your plan. I hope you won't waste my time. Chu Lai King said. Ru Xian began to speak. At first, Chu Lai King was still rather indifferent. A problem that even a group of great cultivators had trouble dealing with. How could a golden core adept and a foundation establishment adept solve it? Not to mention, they were disciples of the School of Medicine, who were not adept at fighting and killing. However, as Ru Xian continued to explain, he gradually became more serious. Every time he gathered honored guests for a discussion, the goal had always been to find the soaring locust king and kill it. However, Ru Xian's proposal was a completely new method of dealing with it. Although it could not kill the soaring locust king, it could stop the locust plague from the very core and force the soaring locust king out. When Ru Xian stopped talking, Chu Lai King closed his eyes in thought for a while before opening them again. Don't waste any more time. Go spread the plague immediately. I'll send people to provide you with protection and cooperate with you as much as I can. Once you're done, you'll be honored guests of the king's estate. I'll personally hold a banquet to celebrate your success. Ru Xian and Hua Xiai took their leave. Chu Lai King paced around the courtyard alone for a while before suddenly receiving a message from the Chan Monastery of Devanaga. He could not help but be delighted. Even the heavens are on my side. With this two-pronged approach, it's finally time to deal with this great problem. However, there was another piece of information hidden within that piqued his great curiosity. Not only has that one Will found the affliction-severing blade and made an agreement with the Golden Cicada Spirit King, But she's even undergone the third heavenly tribulation and defeated the monk king of the 7 treasures. What an unbelievable prodigy. Even the profound sun pales slightly in comparison. Although he had heard about Little and a long time ago, he had never seen him in person even once. He felt rather eager for some reason, which even left him slightly intrigued. He temporarily suppressed this thought and planned on paying the Chan monastery of Devanaga a visit first. He considered who he should send to protect the 2 disciples of the School of Medicine. Please wait here for a moment and wait for the king to send someone over. In a small garden in the king's estate, the caretaker's attitude clearly became much more polite. Yes, said Wuxia. Congratulations, master. Congratulations. You're going to become an honored guest of the king's estate. Wuxia clasped her hands and smiled. You could have just come. Why did you have to drag me along? Originally, Wuxia refused to come to the king's estate with Wuxia. Wuxia had dragged him along. Looking at Wuxia before him, the little girl from back then had finally grown up to the point where she could make her own decisions, and she was finally no longer trapped by hatred. He could not help but sigh with a smile. If it weren't for the sake of giving you a better life, master, why would I have come all the way here? Said Wuxia. You've made the right decision to return, said Wuxia. Even he had never thought a plague could save the world. I still have to help you through the second heavenly tribulation after all. Look, even someone like Qian Rongji has become a golden core cultivator. Master, you've really been wasting your time in the past few years, said Wuxia. She's a genius like you. She's not someone an old man like me can compare to. Genius? It's just that she's suffered a lot. When Wuxia returned to the 100 schools of thought to invite Wuxia, she saw another genius who had boarded the isolated island where Qian Rongji lived. His name was Lin Xian, or Chu Tian. Right now, it was hard for her to tell if the madness of these 2 people had been cured, or if it had become even worse, unable to extricate themselves from it. That makes sense. Meow. Chapter 1045. The night was bleak and hazy. A dim, crescent moon flickered in and out of the dark clouds. An empty city and a forest of buildings seemed to tell of its prosperity of the past. The night breeze blew gently, scattering white paper money across the ground, drifting about in the wind from time to time. Between the eerie buildings on a long street, a bright black carriage drove over silently. 2 glazed lanterns burned with green willow, the wisps like gloomy eyes. However, the 4 large horses that pulled the carriage flickered in and out of sight. They did not make a single sound. The arrival of the carriage did not disturb the deathly silence of the city. Instead, it was like an underground river that flowed into a lake. The curtains were lifted, revealing a jade-like face. Wuxia scanned the surroundings, but her expression did not change at all. She looked back and asked, Your Highness, many people have died here, but there don't seem to be a lot of insect eggs. This was once one of the 81 prefectures of the Green Province. After the soaring locust king conquered the city, several million people died to the insects. At the same time, it became the largest insect nest in the north of the Green Province, giving birth to countless soaring locust demon generals and even demon commanders. However, after the cultivators of the Green Province slaughtered it with all their might, it had already been completely reduced to a dead city. The streets paved with limestone were not suitable for regular locusts to thrive. There are other insects here. The Dark Queen leaned back on the couch and gently stroked the cat in her arms. The black cat lay in her arms lazily. It did not seem particularly angry, which matched her bearing. People of the Sword Collection Palace? Wuxia asked casually. Should I praise you for being clever? The Dark Queen asked. There's no need for that. Wuxia smiled and let down the curtains, circulating the heavenly tome of Cloud Furnace quietly. She did not go to the trouble of trying to persuade the Dark Queen to avoid unnecessary trouble. Even if this was the north of the Green Province, the territory controlled by the Sword Collection Palace. You really are very clever. The Dark Queen nodded slightly and lowered her head to the cat in her arms. Xiangyue, be a good girl. I'll kill 2 people from the Sword Collection Palace to avenge you. Wuxia opened her eyes slightly, showing a hint of surprise. Don't trouble yourself, master. The people who bullied me are already dead. Xiangyue waved her tail disinterestedly. How can they die? There's no end to the people of the Sword Collection Palace. But there will be a day when I kill them all, and refine them into ghost slaves. The Dark Queen said faintly as a faint smile appeared on her pale, gloomy face. Xiangyue raised her head, and glanced at the Dark Queen. He curled up his body. He knew that she was not talking to him. She had been like this ever since the battle at Burial Mound Mountain. Perhaps it had been like this before, which was why she wanted to leave this comfortable place. To the distant dragon province. Meow. Then let's kill them. However, she no longer wanted to go to the dragon province. He thought to himself, I also want to avenge Big Black. Dragon King of the Sea, just you wait. How dare you kill my Big Black? I won't let you off. This belief was so hopeless, yet so resolute. The further the carriage traveled towards the center of the city, the more damaged the surrounding structures became. Buildings collapsed one by one, basically reduced to ruins. In the very center of the ruins, a man paced back and forth. He wore green clothes and held a broken sword. His expression was lonely. Nearby, a woman in violet sat on the eaves of a half-collapsed hall. She leaned on her hand as she gazed at the changing clouds in a daze. She was not a supreme beauty, but she possessed a thriving sense of vitality. Even the gloomy night and the miserable ruins were unable to influence her at all. Instead, it fueled the hope in her eyes. The man in green raised his head and saw her. His face warmed up. Zijian, let's go back. All right. Yu Zijian replied and leapt off the eaves. Did you find anything, senior brother? The green ruin's sword intent is far too profound. I'll probably need another century before I can completely comprehend it. Fu Qingjin was slightly doubtful. Ever since the green ruin's sword broke, his cultivation in the past few years had been extremely smooth. He had even undergone the second heavenly tribulation. But ever since this year, he always felt like something was amiss when he comprehended the green ruin's sword intent, as if he was missing something. That was why he was searching for inspiration in the ruins. All right. When the time comes, we'll fuse the two swords and kill off all the monsters like the soaring Locust King. Yu Zijian's eyes shone brightly. Her killing intent was pure and clear. You can't kill them all. Fu Qingjin shook his head gently. No matter how hard he worked, ruins like this would always appear. No matter how glorious a structure was, there would be a time when it collapsed. Blindly trying to protect it was just asking for trouble. Even if there were no demons that devoured or killed the thousands of lives, they would still die in the end. What did the so-called good and evil matter? I have to kill them all even if I can't. Yu Zijian was stubborn. Where do you want to go? I'll go with you. Fu Qingjin was confused as to why he would have such thoughts of confusing good and evil. Had he been too deeply influenced by the green ruin's sword intent? However, after the green ruin's sword broke, the influence of the previous masters of the green ruin's sword had been eliminated. All of his thoughts should have originated from his own heart. Thank you, senior brother. I also have to work hard on cultivation, so that I can fuse the two swords with you as soon as possible, said Yu Zijian. Fu Qingjin looked into her eyes. A bright violet flowed through them. Yu Zijian asked in confusion, What's wrong? Nothing. Fu Qingjin shifted his gaze away first and shook his head. The green ruins and violet clouds were yin and yang. When one sword appeared, the other would definitely follow closely behind. Most sword masters were lovers. However, the strange thing was that they had spent so many years together. Their tacit understanding was already extremely deep, yet they did not develop any feelings for each other. Let's return to the Sword Collection Palace. The crescent moon burst out of the clouds, illuminating the entire city with clear light. Right when the two streaks of light were about to tear through the air, a ghostly figure suddenly rose up, rapidly spreading across the ruins of the city. Fu Qingjin suddenly looked back, only to see a huge ghost claw swinging down viciously. He was unable to dodge it. Boom! It was like a clap of thunder. The ground shook violently, and countless ruins collapsed. A mountainous ghost stood in the ruins, slamming its hand against the ground. It happened to be the void-bellied Ghost King. The carriage stopped quietly beneath the huge ghost's feet, and the Dark Queen disembarked. The green ruins and violet clouds. I never thought there would be two big fish. The void-bellied Ghost King's fingers shone with a mixture of azure and violet light. Fu Qingjin and Yu Zijian crossed their swords, forming an illusory domain. A purple building vaguely appeared on the green ruins. The azure was heavy, while the violet was faint. However, they managed to block the Dark Queen's fatal strike together. Dark Queen, how can a great cultivator behave in such a despicable manner? Fu Qingjin said. Not only was she bullying the weak, but she even used a sneak attack like this. Damned insect. The Dark Queen was filled with disgust. She could not be bothered with arguing. The void-bellied Ghost King pressed down with another huge hand, and the azure and violet illusion immediately approached shattering. Do you really want to declare war against the Sword Collection Palace? Fu Qingjin asked. I just want to crush you to death, said the Dark Queen. Your Highness, this probably won't assist us in dealing with the soaring Locust King. Ru Xian also disembarked from the carriage. Ru Xian, I praised you earlier for being smart. Don't be stupid, Piao Tianxue said. Chapter 1046. The Dark Queen glanced at her indifferently, and Ru Xian immediately felt a heavy sense of danger. The woman before her was extremely dangerous. Demonic cultivators never cared about reason. Some of them could even ignore the pros and cons, acting based on their moods. The Dark Queen clearly belonged to this group. Do as you please. Ru Xian returned to the carriage, but she silently crushed a jade talisman in her sleeve. The Dark Queen sensed something and squinted her eyes slightly. Then she turned around and looked at the void-bellied Ghost King's subordinates, Fu Qingjin and Yu Zijian. She was asking if she really wanted to declare war against the Sword Collection Palace. Exactly what she wanted was to declare war against the Sword Collection Palace. She was not like how she seemed, acting completely based on her moods. Instead, she had already predicted the outcome a long time ago. However, this was an even deeper form of fearlessness. Even if she had to stake the umbral insect's legacy, she wanted to fulfill what she had said and kill everyone from the Sword Collection Palace. Senior brother, I can't hold on much longer. You better find a way to escape. Yu Zijian's sword-wielding hand trembled slightly. As a Foundation Establishment cultivator, just resisting the void-bellied Ghost King's aura had already drained all of her concentration. If she had not worked with Fu Qingjin, she would not have lasted even a second. Hold on a little longer. Reinforcements will arrive very soon. Fu Qingjin tossed out a violet talisman with a wave of his hand. A resplendent streak of light pierced through the ghost's claw and shot towards the Dark Queen. The ruins and ground along the way were sliced open gently like thin paper. Even the hazy moonlight and the hazy night wind were no exception. The strike was like the full-powered strike of a great sword cultivator. However, under the Dark Queen's indifferent gaze, the streak of light began to distort and dim before it had even approached 300 meters away, vanishing into the night in the blink of an eye. She continued to stroke the cat. She had sealed up the region a long time ago. If she still failed to kill two juniors, it would be a waste of her cultivation. Fu Qingjin frowned firmly. Violet talismans were extremely precious, equivalent to a single strike from a great cultivator. But against another great cultivator, its effects were extremely limited, not to mention that he had been ambushed. Was he really going to die here tonight? He was not afraid of death, but he wanted to protect the woman beside him. Senior brother, it's all right. Yu Zijian smiled with difficulty. The light in her eyes continued to flicker. Actually, I knew there were endless monsters in the world, and I knew I would die to monsters sooner or later. I just never thought it would be so soon. You better go. Fu Qingjin pursed his lips and did not answer. He activated the purple talismans and transformed them into streaks of sword light, lightning and flames. However, he was unable to block the void-bellied Ghost King's gigantic palm. Yu Zijian looked at Fu Qingjin and opened her mouth, but she did not try to persuade him any further. Instead she smiled. Then let's just die together. However, I don't want my soul to end up in the hands of the umbral insect. I won't, Fu Qingjin said. In an instant, the faint purple pavilion collapsed. leaving behind only the green ruins illusion. The last purple talisman burned out. The Dark Queen said, "I'm struggling at death's door. There are so many old friends tonight." An emotional voice suddenly rang out. In the beginning, it was still beyond the clouds, but by the time it reached the last word, it had already arrived. Li Qingshan made his way over from between the ruins and stepped into the sealed region. He clasped his hands. "I am Li Qingshan. Greetings, Your Highness." Then he glanced at the cat in her arms deeply and could not help but smile resplendently, revealing his pure white teeth. Xuanyue's ears perked up as she stared at Li Qingshan with her cat eyes. Her gaze was filled with confusion. She just found it to be slightly familiar. "Is this the reinforcements you've called in?" The Dark Queen ignored Li Qingshan and looked at the carriage behind her. "He's always been a busybody." Ru Xian lifted the curtains and smiled. "Not just anyone can stick their nose into my business. Li Qingshan, do you think I'm afraid to kill you just because you're the unraging monk's disciple?" Li Qingshan. Fu Qingjin's heart skipped a beat. He still remembered this name clearly, while a gleam of interest flashed through Yu Zijian's eyes. She said silently, "Niu Juxia. Your Highness, don't listen to this woman's nonsense. I'm not being a busybody. I'm still a guest elder of the Sword Collection Palace after all. If a disciple of the Sword Collection Palace is in trouble, I obviously have to lend a hand. All right, you can smack that Fu guy to death. You can even leave the woman to me. If you don't mind, there's also the cat in my arms. I just happen to be lacking a pet." Even the Dark Queen was taken aback by what Li Qingshan said. She never thought he would be so bold. Only when the cat in her arms meowed furiously did she return to her senses. Her face immediately sank. "Even if the unraging monk was here, he wouldn't be bold enough to speak to me like that. I think I've said it before. I'm Li Qingshan. Senior brother, looks like we won't be dying today." Yu Zijian smiled. "He specifically said he wanted me dead." Fu Qingjin smiled bitterly. She had always been so optimistic, but the disparity in strength was so great. What use was a life-saving straw like that? Of course, she could keep the Sword Collection Palace busy until reinforcements arrived. But was that even possible? "He's just joking. You don't have to take it seriously, senior brother," said Yu Zijian. "Are you very familiar with him?" Fu Qingjin glanced at her deeply. Yu Zijian nodded slightly. She did not deny it. "All right, Li Qingshan. I'll kill them first, and then I'll teach you a lesson." The Dark Queen waved her hand, and the void-bellied Ghost King opened its huge pitch-black mouth, trying to swallow Fu Qingjin and Yu Zijian. Like a whale sucking in water, black wind immediately surged, and Yu Zijian was launched into the air uncontrollably. Fu Qingjin grabbed her hand firmly, but his feet left the ground as well. He had run out of spiritual qi after holding on for so long. "Give me some face." Li Qingshan extended his hand from afar, and surging demon qi condensed into a black muscular arm. It extended its fingers and grabbed the void-bellied Ghost King's head from the front. The void-bellied Ghost King roared out furiously, but it was unable to break free from the black demonic claw. The surging black wind halted. A demon king. The Dark Queen shivered inside. Her sunken face was filled with surprise. "Don't talk nonsense. I'm a Buddhist disciple." Li Qingshan pushed his hand forward, and the mountainous void-bellied Ghost King was launched far away, smashing through countless structures. He turned around and arrived before Fu Qingjin and Yu Zijian. He smiled. "Zijian, long time no see, and Kid Fu too." Fu Qingjin was stunned as well. When he first met Li Qingshan, he was only a foundation establishment cultivator. In just a few short decades he had actually gained such strength. It was truly unbelievable, and the power that belonged to the demon domain filled him with fear. On the other hand, Yu Zijian was not surprised at all, whether it was Li Qingshan's strength or the demon king's abilities. She smiled. "It really has been a long time. I heard you returned from the Mist Province. If you still hadn't come to the Sword Collection Palace, I would have gone to the Clear River Prefecture to look for you." The Dark Queen said furiously, "Li Qingshan, do you really think you can stop me with these abilities?" "I'm not bold enough to clash with Her Highness the Dark Queen, but this is the territory of the Sword Collection Palace after all." I'd advise you to leave. Chapter 1047. The Dark Queen's eyes narrowed, but there was not the slightest hint of fear or hesitation. Instead, there was unforgettable resentment. Ming concubine. Like a streak of light, the sword pierced through the clouds. When it arrived above the city, it suddenly paused and turned into a woman. The woman wore a simple set of palace clothes, beautiful and noble, but she had a pair of firm, straight eyebrows. She called out coldly, "Dark Queen, how dare you behave atrociously in the north? I won't spare you today." One sword into 10,000 swords. With a casual swing, she produced a glorious streak of light, which suddenly split into thousands of swords of light in the air, falling down like a storm. Ghost domain of the netherworld. The Dark Queen took a step forward. Her wide sleeve drifted about, and ghastly ghost chi immediately rose up from the ruins, forming a sinister domain of ghosts. Vicious ghost faces received the rain of swords. With a flash, Li Qingshan grabbed Ru Xian and Yu Zijian by the shoulders and took them away from the battlefield. They arrived on a tall building in the distance. Streaks of light landed in the ghost domain, kicking up ripples. The streaks of light were devoured and melted by the ghost chi, while the ghost chi was dispersed by the streaks of light. One yin and one yang, one tough and one soft. They seemed like natural enemies. There were no violent booms or collisions. There were only heavy explosions in the air, immediately enveloping the city in a storm. Countless ruins were swept into the air before being ground to smithereens again. The dark clouds in the sky dispersed, and the crescent moon shone dimly. It was like a slightly closed eye, coldly watching the hysterical hatred the two women felt towards each other. "Why didn't you save senior brother Fu?" Yu Zijian asked. "Because I only have 2 hands." Li Qingshan raised his hands, expressing his powerlessness. He was not some good person who repaid evil with kindness. How much trouble had Fu Qingjin caused him? Nothing could be better than his death. Most importantly, he could restrain the Ming concubine and allow the Dark Queen to retreat calmly. However, the development of the matter exceeded his expectations. The Dark Queen had no intentions of retreating. Instead, she summoned a few more vicious ghost kings, charging towards the Ming concubine on gloomy ghost flames. She wanted to fight to the death. Fu Qingjin powered the green ruin's sword as hard as he could, fusing with the sword and turning into a streak of green light. He rushed out of the battlefield. The Dark Queen's figure suddenly appeared before him. She extended a beautiful pale white hand and grabbed the streak of light. "Die!" Fu Qingjin felt like he was suffocating, even though he hadn't needed to breathe to maintain his life many years ago. But Xiaomei's hand was even more terrifying than the Ghost King's ghost claw. A bone-chilling cold spread out from it. His soul was also frozen, and he could no longer maintain the state of being one with the sword. "Bitch, don't you dare harm the disciples of my sword collection palace." The sky was suddenly illuminated. The sword shone with white light, forcing back the ghost kings. Ming Fei and her sword alone killed their way into the gloomy domain of ghosts. She pointed the sword right at the Dark Queen. The edge of the sword trembled, taking the initiative. The Dark Queen turned around with composure and sneered. "Sure enough, you've come." She held a small banner in her hand and waved it at concubine Ming. At that instant, the cries of 10,000 ghosts echoed across the heavens and earth. "Myriad Ghost Banner." Ming Fei raised an eyebrow. The sword in her hand trembled violently, but it had already lost its original rhythm, as if it was about to fly out of her hand. The Myriad Ghost Banner was the treasure of the Umbralene sect. It refined far more than 10,000 ghosts, but hundreds of thousands, gathering countless vengeful spirits and evil ghosts. The resentment in ghost chi were so heavy that it could change the color of the world and make the sun and moon dim. Although the Dark Queen had spared Fu Qingjin gently, he still felt a rumble in his head. His sea of consciousness felt like it was about to shatter and explode. Immediately, he was separated from his sword, and he spurted out a mouthful of blood. He turned black in the air and flew far away. "Senior brother!" Yu Zijian cried out. She wanted to fly towards Fu Qingjin, but the cries of ghosts irritated her. She knelt on one knee. Her cultivation was far too weak. Even when she was affected by the shockwaves from afar, it was still rather difficult for her to endure. Li Qingshan released a ring of demon qi, blocking out the cries of ghosts. However, the building beneath his feet collapsed and collapsed. Fu Qingjin landed on the ground unconscious. However, his body trembled as the gloomy ghost qi corroded him violently. He was close to death. What a nice sight! Li Qingshan shaded his eyes and watched on leisurely. He did not have a particularly good impression of either side. The only one he cared about was Xianyue, but who knew where the Dark Queen had shoved her away? She had vanished, so she should not be in any danger. Suddenly he felt his wrist tighten. Yu Zijian grabbed his arm firmly and lowered her head. Niu Wuxia, I know my senior brother has been very bad to you, but I beg you save him. Originally, Li Qingshan did not want to do anything, but when he heard the name Niu Wuxia, he could not help but think, even if this kid Fu survives, he's basically crippled. I've basically avenged myself, so saving him won't be a problem. It's about time I separate these two women. Look after her, he told Ru Xian before leaping over to the edge of the battlefield. He lifted up the unconscious Fu Qingjin with one hand and fiddled around with the green ruins sword with the other. Sure enough, the sword dimmed, and Fu Qingjin's vitality became extremely feeble. Li Qingshan dug his ear with his pinky. He found the cries of ghosts to be rather noisy, but he suddenly heard something. A cold light flashed through his eyes, and he looked over. The others were already like that, while Ming Fei, who bore the brunt of it, felt extremely pressured. She gritted her teeth secretly. This ghost bitch has actually obtained the Myriad Ghost banner. She still wants to deal with me. She swung her sword and assumed a defensive posture. Snow-white light blocked the cries of ghosts. The Dark Queen stabbed the Myriad Ghost banner into the ground. The Nether Ghost domain that was on the brink of collapse immediately condensed, sealing up the region. A few ghost kings descended from above and surrounded Ming Fei. Bitch, return my child's life. The Dark Queen's gloomy voice pierced through the cries of ghosts, like a golden thread on a white cloth, clear and deep. Who knows how your child died? Moreover, I've always thought you liked dead ghosts. Ming Fei sneered. Before the Dark Queen could say anything, a voice as cold as steel cut in, asking Ming Fei, "What did you say? Who are you?" Ming Fei was slightly surprised. She was rather confused about Li Qingshan's origins. He saved Yu Zijian, so he could be regarded as a friend, but he purposefully left Fu Qingjin alone. Only when he was almost killed did he appear, and now he was questioning her again. You don't need to know who I am. I only want to ask you one thing. Did you kill her child? Li Qingshan arrived between them and clenched his fist as he questioned her. Go away. This has nothing to do with you. The Dark Queen was worried that Li Qingshan would come to restrain her again. The strength he had demonstrated just now was enough to disrupt her plans. Foolish woman, do you really think you can kill her? She's clearly using herself as bait. Do you really want to die here? Li Qingshan turned around and cursed. He could tell a long time ago that Ming Fei's cultivation surpassed the Dark Queen's. Even with the Myriad Ghost banner, it was impossible for her to kill her so easily. The reason why she appeared so weak, even purposefully angering the Dark Queen, was to keep her busy here. The Dark Queen and Ming Fei's faces both changed. Drifting astronomy. Chapter 1048. Answer me. Li Qingshan clenched his fist firmly. Killing intent was contained within him. The Dark Queen did not have the ability to kill Ming Fei, but he did. As long as Ming Fei was bold enough to nod and admit it, he would be bold enough to kill her immediately. Who cared if it was the King Chu's estate or the Sword Collection Palace? That was his sore spot. It has nothing to do with me, Ming Fei said proudly. Liar, the Dark Queen said. The Ghost Kings roared out and lunged towards Ming Fei. Die, bitch. Ming Fei swung her sword to receive him. Light coiled around her as she clashed with the Ghost Kings. She did not show any weakness at all. At this moment, two magnificent streaks of light rushed out from the horizon, as if they were proving Li Qingshan's words. The Dark Queen furrowed her brows and wanted to retreat, but Ming Fei did not spare her. She was determined to kill this mortal enemy of hers. Li Qingshan stood in the center of the battlefield. His long hair drifted about in the violent wind. He unclenched his fist and lowered his head in thought. He took out an item from his bosom. It was a curved horn. It was the Xieji's horn that had once almost forced him into dire straits several decades ago. It possessed the wondrous ability to distinguish between truth and lies. He had found it in Fu Qingjin's Sumeru ring. The Xieji's horn did not respond to Ming Fei's words. Of course, perhaps Ming Fei possessed a method to fool the Xieji's horn. But even if Li Qingshan used his senses to judge, Ming Fei did not seem to be lying. Although the Dark Queen was so certain that Ming Fei was the culprit, she seemed more like a stubborn mother who had lost her beloved son. She was not particularly convincing, and if she really did possess concrete evidence, he believed that Chu Lai King would not turn a blind eye to it, turning it into an unresolved case. There were still many doubtful points. For example, the witch in the Crouching Ox village practiced the profound Yin ghost control technique, and not the sword manipulation technique of the Sword Collection Palace. As it seemed now, the witch was basically no more powerful than a mortal, so how could she refine little Anne's soul into a ghost slave? All kinds of questions emerged in his mind. Li Qingshan shook his head and put the Xieji horn back into his arms. Since little Anne was not sure who the murderer was, he did not want to act recklessly like a reckless man. He would investigate slowly, but no matter who the murderer was, Li Qingshan was prepared to kill his entire family. Raising his head again, the Dark Queen was entangled by the Ming concubine, unable to break free for a moment. The two tremendous streaks of light on the horizon flanked the Dark Queen from the left and right. With the three great sword cultivators working together, they were confident they could make the Dark Queen die here. Battle demon possession, Li Qingshan said in a low voice. His demon heart flashed, and the war demon totem imprinted on his back swelled and blurred. It spread and circulated until it covered his entire body, and merged with him as one. He had transformed into the war demon. Immediately, demon qi rushed into the air. Li Qingshan leapt up and used his fingers like a blade, cutting down on the edge of the Ming concubine's sword. He had already used the blade style he had learnt from the Wildflower Blade Soul, which happened to destroy the Ming concubine's attack. The Dark Queen used this opportunity to flee into the distance. She stared at Li Qingshan and was rather confused. This man called himself an elder of the Sword Collection Palace. He had saved a disciple of the Sword Collection Palace first, yet he was helping her now. She was left scratching her head. "Brat, you're looking to die." The Ming concubine flew into a rage. Her sword moved violently like the tide, as sharp as lightning. Li Qingshan swung his palm with composure, dealing with the attacks as they came. He did not lose the upper hand at all. He said to the Dark Queen, "You can go." Although he did not exactly have a good impression of her or respect for her, she was little Anne's mother after all. Li Qingshan obviously would not allow her to die here. The Dark Queen turned around and drifted away. The two streaks of light pursued for over 500 kilometers, before giving up on turning back in the end. One of them was a tall, middle-aged man. He stood like a lone mountain with a sword in hand. His bearing even surpassed the Ming concubines. He was the strongest sword cultivator Li Qingshan had ever seen in his life. The other was much younger. His appearance was rather similar to the Ming concubines. He wore a set of faint yellow blade master clothes, and his bearing was radiant like a prodigy. Together with the Ming concubine, he sealed off Li Qingshan's path of retreat. "You can die in his place." With a flash, the Ming concubine pulled back and stared at Li Qingshan coldly. The three great sword cultivators fell into a sword formation and surrounded Li Qingshan, brimming with killing intent. "I've saved your disciple after all. Do you really have to treat me like an enemy?" Li Qingshan laid out his hands with a smile. In the current world, basically no one could force him into dire straits anymore. Even the Dragon King of the Sea was not confident about that. However, it seemed like he could not take advantage of the Sword Collection Palace anymore. "You've come from the demon domain?" The master of the Sword Collection Palace stared at Li Qingshan. From the surging demon qi he gave off, he was clearly a demon king, and he was even more powerful than regular demon kings. Unless the demon domain invaded on a large scale, demon kings would always remain in their demon caverns. They would never roam the world. No, I'm a disciple of Buddhism, as well as a guest elder of the Sword Collection Palace. Li Qingshan shrugged. Nonsense. The Ming concubine rebuked furiously. Being a disciple of Buddhism was already laughable enough. The Sword Collection Palace did not even have an elder like that. However, the master of the Sword Collection Palace thought of something. A gleam of light flashed through his eyes. You're Li Qingshan. It's rare for someone to know my name, said Li Qingshan. You're Li Qingshan. The young man was surprised. How do you prove it? Palace master, he really is Li Qingshan. He even saved us earlier. Yu Zijian brought the unconscious Fu Qingjin over. Zijian, don't come over. Ming concubine called out. Yes, but he has no ill intentions. First senior brother, hurry up and save senior brother Fu. Yu Zijian stopped and pleaded with the young man. Li Qingshan's heart skipped a beat. Another first senior brother. And he was the first senior brother of the Sword Collection Palace. Zijian, don't worry. Palace master, mother, Qingjin's life is more important, Ji Xuanri said. Not only was he the first senior brother of the Sword Collection Palace, but he was also the first prodigy among the younger generation of the Green Province to undergo the third heavenly tribulation. He was also the son of Chu Lai King and Ming concubine, the human crown prince of the Green Province. If nothing unexpected happened, he would become the next King Chu, a true prodigy. The Chan Monastery of Devanaga can actually accept a disciple like you? The master of the Sword Collection Palace waved his hand and produced a streak of light, shooting into Fu Qingjin's body and immediately forcing out the ghastly qi. The dauntless abbot said, I possess a great Buddhist nature, said Li Qingshan. Just why have you come? I'm a guest elder of the Sword Collection Palace. The Sword Collection Palace still owes me a sword, said Li Qingshan. Since you're a guest elder, why are you helping the Umbral sect? Asked the master of the Sword Collection Palace. What I hate the most in my life is bullying the weak and outnumbering the weak, so I couldn't help but stand up for the weak. As for the Umbral sect, or the Sword Collection Palace, I didn't really consider it. Oh, you're a demon king, so you do know what standing up for the weak is, said the master of the Sword Collection Palace. That's none of your business. If you don't do anything, I'll be leaving. Li Qingshan took off. Hold on. The master of the Sword Collection Palace blocked his way in a flash. Ming concubine and Ji Xuanri worked together, and the sword formation continued to seal up Li Qingshan, preventing him from taking another step forward. Do you really want to kill me? Li Qingshan asked. Chapter 1049. I'm a demon king. Li Qingshan was slightly surprised. Even if the master of the Sword Collection Palace wanted to kill him here, he would not find it so strange. After all, the power he used could not be tolerated by the righteous path. He might even be suspected of colluding with the demon domain, and he had even ruined Ming Fei's plans. If the master of the Sword Collection Palace did not fall out with him, then so be it. But he even allowed him to take a sword. Wasn't that a little too generous? Was there some scheme involved? Since even the Chan Monastery of Devanaga believes you possess a Buddhist nature, it's not the Sword Collection Palace's turn to clean you up. Our Sword Collection Palace always keeps our promises. Since we've agreed to give you a sword, come and take one. What if I don't want to go? Li Qingshan asked. That's up to you. The master of the Sword Collection Palace moved away and waved his hand, expressing that he could leave as he pleased. Ming Fei and Ji Xuanri exchanged glances and stowed their swords away. Since the palace master is so sincere, I'd seem arrogant if I don't go. Let's go. Li Qingshan smiled. No matter what scheme was involved, he was confident he could destroy it with force. Even if it was a tiger's den, he would still venture into it. You really do have some courage, the master of the Sword Collection Palace said. He had not seen the slightest hint of fear in Li Qingshan the entire time. Do you think the palace master will harm me? Li Qingshan said. They made their way north together. Ji Xuanri and Ming Fei took Yu Zijian and Fu Qingjin with them, while Li Qingshan and the master of the Sword Collection Palace flew together. The streak of light was extremely fast, leaving Li Qingshan behind very soon. Li Qingshan smiled. He had no intentions of chasing after them. A while later, Li Qingshan arrived before the renowned sword collection peak. A lone peak hovered in the sky, piercing through the sea of clouds like a lone island. The Chan Monastery of Devanaga's Great Buddha Mountain was renowned for its resemblance to a great Buddha, while the sword collection peak was like a supreme sword. The isolated peaks below were like swords, currently bowing towards the sword in the sky. Between the hidden sword peak and the other peaks below, there was an iron chain that was as large as a horned dragon. It was as if once the iron chain was broken, the divine sword would break through the air and fly away. Li Qingshan thought, the mountain forms the force, and the force forms the formation. The protective formation of the sword collection palace is anything but ordinary. If I enter it, and the palace master suddenly turns against me, it won't be much safer than venturing into the ink sea. Please. The palace master raised his hand. All right. The sword collection palace did not have a flight ban like the Chan Monastery of Devanaga. The Chan Monastery of Devanaga was filled with Buddhist statues and pagodas, so Buddhist disciples obviously could not fly above senior monks, bodhisattvas, or Buddhas. For a sword cultivator, flying on a sword was the most basic of basics. There were sword lights flying between the peaks. Some of them formed sword formations, some of them fought one-on-one, and some of them flew alone. They practiced the art of sword kinesis and roamed between the mountains and the sea of clouds. They really had the aura of sword immortals. The palace master invited Li Qingshan onto the heavens leaning peak. In the majestic hall of the sword palace he ordered, summon the sword masters of the various peaks. Immediately prepare for the sword selection ceremony. Li Qingshan gazed out of the hall. The lone sword-like peaks suddenly lit up with light of various colors. The light rapidly extended along the iron chain and reached the hidden sword peak. At that moment, Li Qingshan heard a strange hum. It was heavy, yet it also possessed a soaring clarity, enough to make even his soul tremble. The hidden sword peak was activated. A streak of light rushed into the air, shattering all the clouds in the sky. The stars were vast, and the moonlight was boundless. They all seemed to spin dazzling. All the disciples of the sword collection palace stopped what they were doing, raising their heads and gazing at this sight. Their expressions were no different from the disciples of the Chan Monastery of Devanaga during the Dharma assembly of Zen. What a detestable sound. Li Qingshan, where the hell have you come to? The wildflower blade soul's voice suddenly rang out in Li Qingshan's head. In order to prevent the wildflower blade soul from rambling and drawing hatred to him, he had always placed the wildflower blade in the Azura field. However, their minds were still connected. Just now, Li Qingshan withdrew his gaze and answered in surprise. You sensed it? I hate swords the most. Cut that damned sword in half. The wildflower blade soul ordered. That's not a single sword. Li Qingshan glanced at the sword collection palace. There were many swords stuck in it. The wondrous sound probably came from all the swords ringing together. Really? Then cut them all. The wildflower blade soul said impatiently. Don't. I still have one in there. Li Qingshan was not that bored. What? You want to use a sword? You're bold enough to use a sword? The wildflower blade soul suddenly lost his temper. Blade intent rushed into Li Qingshan's sea of consciousness, kicking up surging waves. You've lost your mind. Li Qingshan suppressed it with the spirit turtle's method of sea suppression in a hurry. You already have me. You're not allowed to use any other weapons, much less swords. Those who use swords are all hypocrites. I'll kill every single one I see. The wildflower blade soul said furiously. Haha, that's a sharp one. Not only are you a hypocrite, but you're also a poser. Apart from my little Anne, Li Qingshan had completely forgotten that he had also used a sword in the past. Don't worry. I'm only drawing a sword. I don't know how to use it. Don't say I didn't warn you. If you refine any other sword, we'll be on our own. Why are you laughing, fellow? All the master of the sword collection palace saw was Li Qingshan's mysterious smile. Nothing. I'm just excited to see something like this. Li Qingshan looked at the master of the sword collection palace. If it really was like what the wildflower blade soul had said, then this person was the greatest hypocrite and poser. As they spoke, The sword masters and elders of the various peaks arrived in the hall. One of them cried out in surprise and joy, "Li Qingshan." Li Qingshan glanced past them. The speaker was a handsome man, also at the second heavenly tribulation. He must have been a sword master of some peak. Even the joy on his face was unable to wash away his melancholy. Li Qingshan found him rather familiar, but he was unable to recall his name. "You're Yin Xiaoqiu. You've come at a perfect time. Are you bold enough to fight me again?" Yin Xiaoqiu's face turned cold, and he gripped the waterbreaker sword on his waist firmly. All these years of arduous cultivation had been for this moment. If it were not for the fact that Li Qingshan had gone to the Mist Province, he would have gone to challenge him a long time ago. "Oh, it's you." Only then did Li Qingshan remember that he had defeated Yin Xiaoqiu's waterbreaker sword with the water sword in the past, which basically made him famous in the Clear River Prefecture. "Since you've come, why bother putting on an act?" Yin Xiaoqiu was certain that Li Qingshan was purposefully humiliating him by not being able to call out his name. But Li Qingshan had gone through so many years of continuous battles. Who knew how many existences at the third heavenly tribulation he had even killed, lingering on the brink of death so many times. So how could a clash between Foundation establishment cultivators in the past leave any deep impression on him? At the very least, Fu Qingjin still posed a great threat to him. But Yin Xiaoqiu had been defeated by him in a single strike, having been worn away by the passage of time a long time ago. "Putting on an act," Li Qingshan swore inside. "It's not like I'm using a sword right now." "Xiaoqiu, stop messing around," the master of the Sword Collection Palace said. "Palace Master, please allow me to spar with the sword against elderly." Chapter 1050. Li Qingshan sniggered and stood with his arms crossed. Yin Xiaoqiu sure had an unlucky name. He always chose to challenge him when he was at his most powerful. It was impossible for him not to worry. His behavior only made the sword masters and elders of the Sword Collection Palace even more furious. They said together, "Please grant us your permission, Palace Master." The master of the Sword Collection Palace frowned slightly, while Ming Fei and Ji Xuanri looked at one another. They had all witnessed Li Qingshan's strength. Yin Xiaoqiu had no chance of victory at all. However, if they just said that, Yin Xiaoqiu would definitely be unwilling to accept it, and the others would not accept it either. However, if they allowed Li Qingshan to use the methods of the Demon King here, there would be a lot of trouble. After a moment of thought, the master of the Sword Collection Palace nodded. "Thank you, Palace Master." Yin Xiaoqiu clasped his hands and turned to look at Li Qingshan. "Then I'll lose again." Li Qingshan made his way out of the hall and brushed past Yin Xiaoqiu. He arrived on the terrace in front of the hall and gazed at the Sword Collection peak in the sky. Yin Xiaoqiu followed close behind. He said to Li Qingshan's back, "If you don't have a suitable sword, you can choose one on the Sword Collection peak before you spar with me." Not only did he want to win, but he wanted to win in an upright manner. "There's no need for all the trouble." Li Qingshan turned around. "What, you still want to use the water sword?" Yin Xiaoqiu's face turned slightly cold. "No, my swordsmanship has already reached a higher realm. I don't have a sword in my hand, nor do I have a sword in my heart. Come at me." Li Qingshan brought his fingers together like a sword. All the sword cultivators frowned. Talking about a higher realm of swordsmanship in the Sword Collection Palace was basically showing off before an expert. "What, I don't have a sword in my hand, nor do I have a sword in my heart," was even more nonsense. "You're asking to be humiliated. Watch my sword." Yin Xiaoqiu bellowed out, and his various emotions diluted and dispersed, turning into a faint sense of sorrow. The breaking water sword leapt out of its sheath silently. The curved blade was like a crescent moon, flying out from the calm surface of the lake and sweeping towards Li Qingshan's throat. Water-severing worries. It was like a glimpse of the world, yet it was also like an antelope hanging its horn, untraceable. All the sword cultivators gasped in admiration, as expected of the descendant of a famous sword. Even they did not dare to say that they could block the power of this sword. They could only temporarily avoid it. Meanwhile, Li Qingshan did not move. He had once exclaimed in admiration of Yin Xiaoqiu's sword will. Now Yin Xiaoqiu's sword will was 10 times better than before. It was indeed a peerless sword technique inherited from the 10 famed swords. There was nothing wrong with the sword intent. The problem was that it was too slow and powerless. Just when all the sword cultivators thought that this sword would kill Li Qingshan on the spot, Li Qingshan stretched out his right hand. Without using any sword or saber techniques, he gently twisted his middle finger and index finger. The flying moon turned back into the blade of the sword. The blade of the sword suddenly froze and could not advance another inch. Yin Xiaoqiu's expression froze as well. He didn't even need to use his devil qi, let alone the water sword. There are always things in this world that you can't sever, such as worries like flowing water like me. Li Qingshan's voice was filled with a faint sigh. The feeling of showing off in front of a bunch of pretentious peddlers sure was exhilarating. All the sword cultivators were rendered speechless. How is this possible? Yin Xiaoqiu released his grip on the hilt and took a step back as he murmured to himself. To a sword cultivator, the sword was as important as his life. He had unconsciously released his grip on the hilt. Clearly, his mind was in a mess. After decades of bitter cultivation and pursuit, he had finally arrived in front of his opponent, but his opponent had actually forgotten his name. He wanted to take revenge, but he found that the distance between them had widened even further. Suddenly, he felt that everything he had done was in vain. Suddenly, a hand pressed down on his shoulder, and the palace master said, "Xiaoqiu, there's no need for you to lose heart. Fellow Li has already undergone the third heavenly tribulation. You're obviously not his opponent." The third heavenly tribulation. Yin Xiaoqiu cried out involuntarily, gazing at Li Qingshan in disbelief. The sword cultivators were all stunned. Undergoing the third heavenly tribulation was equivalent to reaching the apex of the 9 provinces. Across the entire world, all of them were renowned figures. Just how old was the person before them? Yet he had already undergone the third heavenly tribulation. What kind of cultivation speed was this? Only a few people knew about Li Qingshan undergoing the third heavenly tribulation. Even if they knew, they were unwilling to spread it, as his cultivation was far too similar to the Demon King's. And the Chan monastery of Devanaga was already prepared to hold a grand ceremony to celebrate Little, and when she was conferred the title of Monk King, they would invite all the great cultivators of the Green Province, and even the fellow Buddhists from the outer sect. Li Qingshan would never receive such treatment. Li Qingshan tossed the breaking water sword back to Yin Xiaoqiu. Yin Xiaoqiu gazed at the blade, and his expression was reflected on it. After a while he said, "I'm going back to cultivate." Afterwards he flew off heaven's leaning peak. He did not ride on his sword. The sword cultivators were all gloomy. The palace master gazed at Yin Xiaoqiu's figure and thought, "Xiaoqiu, it's about time you understand that the greatest sorrow in the world is powerlessness. If you're powerless, then it's impossible for you to relieve your sorrow." Li Qingshan shrugged and turned around to the palace master. "Can I draw my sword now?" "Anytime. But since you're a guest elder of my sword collection palace, you must abide by the rules of my sword collection palace," said the palace master. "What rules?" "You can't use force to take it," said the palace master. "Then what should I use?" Li Qingshan answered with a question. "Heart. The sword selection ceremony is not just a person choosing a sword, but a sword choosing a person too," said the palace master. "All right, I'll try my best." Li Qingshan did not think much of it. From the soaring dragon sword to the wildflower blade at the end of the road, not a single weapon had chosen him, obediently allowing him to use it. However, in the end, he still had to use it however he wanted. "I've not worked so hard to cultivate just so weapons can pick and choose. You need to seal your cultivation," said the palace master sternly. Li Qingshan was slightly taken aback. He smiled playfully. "You're making things difficult for me, palace master." Not being able to draw the best sword was a small matter, but if his cultivation was sealed, he would be at the mercy of others once the sword collection palace turned against him. "These are the rules. They're not targeting you," said the palace master. Those who could draw their swords on the sword collection peak were all disciples who had just undergone the first heavenly tribulation. Not only did they have the right, But they were also not powerful enough to contend against the sword collection peak. They could only choose their swords based on their luck. However, at Li Qingshan's level of strength, he could ignore his heart and draw his sword with force. Since you've said that, then that's fine. Li Qingshan spread his arms and said calmly, "Please seal my cultivation, Palace Master." The Palace Master walked over and pressed his fingers together like a sword, immediately tapping all of Li Qingshan's major acupoints. With each tap, a strand of sword chi would flow in, and the dense demon chi would withdraw slightly. When it was forced back into the demon heart, it had already been enveloped by layers of sword chi. It was difficult for Li Qingshan to use all of his human cultivation, but the Palace Master only needed a single thought to trigger the sword chi and destroy his demon heart. Li Qingshan looked at the master of the sword collection palace before him with a smile. There were some things that could not be sealed. That was his greatest power. He only needed a single thought to suppress the sword chi. Even if he became slightly injured, it would not be a big deal. Chapter 1051. Their eyes met. One's gaze was deep, while the other's was clear. Both of them were tall and straight. As they stood facing each other, they were basically equal. There was also an indescribable flow of chi, like the mountain breeze that echoed between the peaks. "You can go now," said the Palace Master. "All right," Li Qingshan thought. "Didn't you want to fight here?" After arriving at the main hall, there was an almost straight metal chain that connected to the hidden sword peak in the sky. Li Qingshan glanced upwards and leapt onto the chain, beginning his climb with all his might. Everyone watched as Li Qingshan's figure continued to rise. As he leapt, he was like a tiger climbing a mountain, arriving at the bottom of the hidden sword peak. Li Qingshan glanced down. Everyone was already as tiny as a mustard seed. When he looked up again, at such a close distance, the hidden sword peak did not seem much different from any other mountain. Greenery and vines coiled around the rock. However, basically every rock was stabbed with a sword. There were thousands of them, making for a rather spectacular sight. However, the swords were all sealed in a layer of rust, making it impossible to tell the material of the sword. One had to make a choice based on instinct, and if the sword did not choose its owner, it was impossible to pull it out by force. Everyone wanted to know what kind of sword he would pull out. "I want the strongest sword." Li Qingshan leapt onto the hidden sword peak without any hesitation. Even if he had already given up on the path of the sword, the stronger the weapon, the better. He could still sacrifice it if he did not use it. He could not help but think of something. If he sacrificed all the swords on the hidden sword peak on the Azura altar of armaments, he wondered what kind of Azura weapon he would obtain. However, he could only think about it for now. The Azura altar of armaments also needed to test the strength of the sacrificer. The end-blossoming blade was already the most powerful weapon he could wield right now. Discarding these stray thoughts, Li Qingshan began searching through the sword collection peak. Although the master of the sword collection palace had sealed up his demon heart, his strength of the ox demon could not be sealed up. He was confident he could draw out any sword on the sword collection peak. What mattered was how he could find the strongest sword. He climbed up and down. He seemed like he was focused on searching for the sword, gripping the rusty hilt from time to time before releasing it again. Actually, he was secretly practicing the spirit turtle's method of sea suppression to derive it. On a platform at the foot of Sky Leaning Peak, a group of outer sect disciples, who were only in the chi refinement realm, looked up as well. Their eyes were filled with envy and hope as they discussed among themselves softly. "Who is this person? He's so powerful." "You're really ignorant. Haven't you heard of Li Qingshan? I heard he's not much older than us. Yet he's already become a guest elder. He's even the White Hawk commander of the Hawkwolf Guard." Among the discussions, only a young man remained silent. His gaze remained locked onto Li Qingshan the entire time, without shifting at all. The outline of his bronze face was distinct. If someone looked closely, they would discover that he bore some resemblance to Li Qingshan. A short, chubby young man beside him smiled. "Senior brother Xiaoyao, why were you looking at him so seriously? You're both surnamed Li. Don't tell me you're relatives?" "How can that be?" Li Xiaoyao withdrew his gaze and smiled. I do want a relative like that. Sigh. I'm the one who really wants a relative like that. It's enough for you to have Senior Uncle Hua's protection. In less than 2 years, you'll probably be able to undergo the heavenly tribulation and pull out a sword on the hidden sword peak. By then you have to protect me. I can't protect you. Li Xiaoyao shook his head with a smile. He knew that this junior brother Tian was renowned for being straightforward, but he did not have any ulterior motives. As for the assistance that Hua Sengzan had provided him, there was no need to deny it. Otherwise, with his talent, it would have been impossible for him to reach the 10th layer at such a young age. Forget it, forget it. I knew you couldn't be relied on. I still have to rely on myself. Oh right. Why haven't I seen Senior Uncle Hua recently? He seems to be in secluded cultivation. I heard that Senior Uncle Hua and Elderly are good friends. Do you think that's true? I'm not sure about that. You'll have to ask Senior Uncle Hua. Li Xiaoyao actually knew that a large part of the reason why Hua Sengzan treated him differently was because of the man on the hidden sword peak, his second uncle. Of course, he did not possess that kind of extraordinary talent after all. After so many years, he had not even undergone a single heavenly tribulation. However, he already felt like it was enough. This was the path of a swordsman that he wanted to walk. Even if he could not reach the apex, he wanted to walk down it step by step. He thought to himself, second uncle, even if you don't acknowledge me, I'll still treat you as my second uncle. Li Qingshan sensed something and glanced down. When he saw Li Xiaoyao, he naturally felt a connection of blood. He could not help but smile. The child from back then had already grown up. By now, he had already eliminated most of the swords on the hidden sword peak. They were all spiritual and arcane artifacts. Only 23 true treasured swords remained. Although they seemed rusty to regular people, no different from other swords at all, his eyes shone brightly. He could not help but sigh inside. The heritage of the Sword Collection Palace sure runs deep. I wonder where they gathered so many treasured swords from. If you include the treasured swords that are currently in use, there'll be several dozen of them. The South Sea Sword Pavilion is also a large sect of sword cultivators, but they basically want to cry when they see the hidden sword peak. However, what came next would be rather difficult. 2 or 3 of the 10 renowned swords of the Sword Collection Palace seemed to have yet to appear, which was his target. However, how was he supposed to find those 2 or 3 renowned swords out of the 23? The hidden sword was not just a collection. It was also a seal. Li Qingshan knew very little about the 10 renowned swords of the Sword Collection Palace, so he had no idea about the names or characteristics of the remaining renowned swords. Under the circumstances where their grades were similar, even the spirit turtle would struggle to find out which sword was the renowned one. He felt rather regretful. If he had known earlier, he would have investigated a little. Making up his mind, he might as well search through them one by one. He seems to have separated the grades of the swords. Ming Fei said to the palace master with a frown. It's fine. That's his ability. The palace master was not particularly worried about the fact that Li Qingshan was about to take away a treasured sword, or even a renowned sword, from the Sword Collection Palace. That's true. Ming Fei sneered. The soaring dragon sword seems to be stuck here. Li Qingshan discovered a hole in a piece of green rock. It happened to match the shape of the soaring dragon sword. When he gazed into the depths of the hole, it was like a black eye staring back at him. But at a closer glance, there was nothing out of the ordinary. Li Qingshan shook his head. Was he imagining things? In the end, he eliminated another 6 or 7 swords. He really could not distinguish the remaining ones, so he just let it go. Whatever. They're all treasured swords anyway. It's not like I'm going to use them, so I'll just randomly pick one. Chapter 1052. It flickered extremely quickly like a spark. If Li Qingshan had not been so focused on finding the sword, he probably would have missed it as well. He was surprised and doubtful. What's going on? Is the palace master purposefully luring me into drawing a weaker treasured sword? He could not be blamed for being so suspicious. Ever since he first set foot on the path of cultivation, The Sword Collection Palace had never been friendly to him. Even now they were still vaguely hostile. However, upon further thought, such petty actions did not seem like the palace master's style. Although it was only a short confrontation, he always had a sharp sense of his enemies. If the palace master doesn't want me to draw the sword, why did he send me? Or does he want to kill me on the sword collection peak? But there doesn't seem to be a need for that. Whatever. It's a treasured sword after all. I'll just take it. Li Qingshan flew up and grabbed the hilt. Originally, he thought he would have to use the strength of the ox demon to draw the sword. But he never thought that he would only need to use a little force to draw the sword as easily as drawing it from its sheath. With a gentle shake, the rust that covered the sword fell off. The blade was as thin as a cicada's wing, almost transparent. Bright moonlight suddenly twisted and gathered on the blade, seeping into it bit by bit. Only then did the blade gradually fill up. There was a crescent on the hilt as well. Li Qingshan raised the sword and faced the yellow moon in the sky, forming a full moon. It's soul reversal. Ji Xuanri's expression changed. He subconsciously tightened his grip on Soul Destroyer. There was a scorching sun on the hilt. Soul Reversal and Soul Destroyer both belonged to the 10 renowned swords. Although the two swords were not yin and yang like the Green Ruins and Violet Firmament, they still possessed the laws of yin and yang. It was said that they had been forged at the same time. They were a pair of twins, and they had a mysterious connection with each other. Don't tell me the renowned swords really do possess a spirit. Li Qingshan was surprised. Even though he had not refined it, he had tested the sword's power. Just the presence of the sword alone was enough to tell that regular treasured swords could not compare to it. It was definitely a renowned sword. His feelings were rather mixed. Originally, he wanted to cheat, but in the end the correct answer directly jumped out. He could not help but feel regret, joy, and some disbelief. Moreover, he could feel that this famed sword did not resist him at all. He could probably refine it with a little more effort. It's probably because my charm is too great. When this sword sees me, it's like a young girl in love seeing her Mr. Right. It immediately wants to sleep with me. Amidst the exclamations of the crowd, Li Qingshan grabbed the soul-transforming sword and leaped down from Hidden Sword Peak. Boom! Li Qingshan bent his body slightly and landed in front of the hall, smashing a deep pit on the ground. Li Qingshan straightened up and said to the palace master, "Palace master, you can release me now, right?" "That's impossible. You're not a sword cultivator. How could you have obtained the recognition of the soul-shifting sword? You must have used some trick." An elder angrily rebuked Li Qingshan. Yes, his cultivation was obviously sealed, but he was able to jump down from the Hidden Sword Peak without any injuries. There must be something wrong with this. "Palace master, please capture this man and investigate him in detail." A sword master also expressed his doubts. Even if it was the body-tempering arts of the school of the military, he would probably still be injured when his cultivation was completely sealed up. For a moment, the crowd was in a frenzy. They all wanted to take back the soul-transforming sword and chase Li Qingshan off the mountain. They could not be blamed for being so excited. The 10 famed swords held far too great a significance to the Sword Collection Palace. Even the elders and sword masters could not obtain a single one, yet an outsider had suddenly taken them away. It was like their own son had been abducted. They struggled to accept it, not to mention the fact that this outsider had always shown some respect to the Sword Collection Palace. Even when he faced the palace master, he stood on equal footing. How could they accept this? "Shut up," the palace master said sternly. The heaven-leaning peak immediately fell silent. The palace master said, "Li Qingshan is not an outsider. Instead, he's a guest elder of our Sword Collection Palace. There's nothing wrong with him taking the swords from Hidden Sword Peak by abiding by our rules. Since he chose the soul-transforming sword, it's also the soul-transforming sword that chose him. It's all the will of the heavens." Now that the palace master had spoken, no matter how unwilling the sword masters and elders were, they could only accept this outcome. Li Qingshan listened on silently. He just felt that it was rather unnatural, but he was unable to put his finger on what it was. After much thought, he came to a conclusion, which was that everything had gone a little too smoothly today. He had already grown accustomed to danger, so he was rather unaccustomed to obtaining a famed sword so easily. Moreover, the palace master was far too kind to him. If it was anyone else, then so be it. But the palace master had personally witnessed him transform into a demon. Was he not afraid that his demon chi would contaminate the famed sword? The palace master clasped his hands at Li Qingshan. Congratulations. Now that you've obtained the soul-transforming sword, you'll definitely achieve great things in this era. Thank you for your auspicious words, said Li Qingshan. Then, the palace master said, you can slowly comprehend the ultimate path of the sword contained within the sword. However, in order to make better use of the soul-transforming sword, you're free to practice the various sword cultivation techniques of our sword collection palace, including the sword scripture of heaven and earth. Palace master, you mustn't. Li Qing, elderly is only a guest elder. The sword scripture of heaven and earth is a secret of our sword collection palace that cannot be passed on to outsiders. According to the rules, it cannot be passed on to a guest elder. The elder who had just rebuked Li Qingshan angrily said immediately, of course not. However, elderly has already undergone the third heavenly tribulation, so you can be promoted to an honored elder. You'll have the right to read the sword scripture of heaven and earth. There was an upper minister in the king's mansion, and there was also an upper minister in the sect. The full name of the upper minister elder was the Grand Guest Elder. They had a transcendent position in the sect, but the probability of them appearing was much lower. Usually, there wouldn't be one in a few hundred years. This was because great cultivators were far too rare. Great talent and tremendous amounts of resources were often indispensable. With talent like that, they would obviously be recruited by the various large sections. There was no need for them to become some guest elder, and the resources that a guest elder could receive would never be as great as a disciple of a sect. As a result, the term honored elder had basically been forgotten by everyone. Yet the palace master brought it up again. The elder, who was extremely displeased with Li Qingshan, immediately reddened. Once Li Qingshan became an honored elder, even he would have to bow to him. Just when he was about to stop him, the palace master glanced at him, and all the voices of opposition were immediately silenced. A few of them seemed to be in thought. Elderly, what do you think? The palace master then asked Li Qingshan. He seemed extremely amiable. I'm obviously happy that the palace master is so fond of me. I'll definitely use this sword well. No matter how he looked at it, the palace master was trying to rope him in. However, Li Qingshan just felt that something was off, so he asked, Palace master, you don't have any ill intentions towards me, do you? Definitely not. Before he had even finished speaking, the Xieji's horn in Li Qingshan's bosom suddenly lit up. The light shone through his clothes, appearing extremely eye-catching in the night. Li Qingshan and the palace master looked at each other silently. The atmosphere suddenly became rather awkward. Chapter 1053. Li Qingshan decided to say something to break the awkward atmosphere. He took out the Xieji's horn. It was so silent that one could hear a pin drop. Not a single sword master, or elder of the sword collection palace, did not recognize the Xieji's horn. They all knew about its ability to distinguish between truth and lies. They could not help but look at the palace master's face, and they all felt rather awkward. No matter how much hostility they felt towards Li Qingshan, having their lies exposed right in front of him was like a slap to their faces. After all, the sword collection palace was still a righteous sect, and the palace master was basically equivalent to the pride of the entire sword collection palace. The palace master squinted his eyes slightly, and a flash of anger seemed to flash through them. However, he immediately recovered his composure. This Xieji's horn belongs to my sword collection palace. Why is it in your hands? I borrowed it for a while. The corner of Li Qingshan's lips twitched as he held back his laughter. His stomach was already rolling with laughter. Even if the palace master would directly turn against him, he could not care less. Can you return it to me? The palace master asked. Sure. Li Qingshan passed the Xieji's horn to the palace master, and could not help but ask, Palace master, Does what you said earlier still count? Of course. This item has been around for a long time, so it's no longer as effective as before. You don't have to worry too much about it, said the palace master. It's just a small matter. I obviously won't worry about it. Li Qingshan became even more certain that there was a scheme here, but he was unable to figure out what it was. If they wanted to harm him, just now, when his cultivation was sealed up, would be the perfect time. Even if he had hidden his strength, it would definitely be extremely dangerous if several great sword cultivators worked together with the formations of the entire sword collection palace. Even he was not confident that he could escape unscathed. Just what was the master of the sword collection palace planning? However, since the palace master did not turn against him, Li Qingshan was more than happy to become an honored elder. He wanted to see just what he was capable of. The next morning, the light on the sword collection peak had already dispersed, and the sun shone down on the various peaks. As a result, the master of the sword collection palace held a simple ceremony on Heaven's Leaning Peak, formally conferring Li Qingshan as an honored elder of the sword collection palace. In the majestic palace, all the sword masters and elders, regardless of whether they were convinced or not, bowed to Li Qingshan together and greeted him. Elder Shangqing. Li Qingshan crossed his arms and stood high up on the platform. He had a lazy smile on his face, and the soul-rotating sword hung by his waist. The sword collection palace master asked, "Does High Elder have anything to say?" Li Qingshan coughed into his fist. "Then I'll say a few words. There's no need to be so polite, fellow cultivators. Since I've become an honored elder of the sword collection palace, I'll definitely do my best to serve the sword collection palace. As long as the palace master gives the order, I'll go through mountains of blades and seas of fire. Of course, there may still be people here who have ill intentions towards me, but I am sincere to you. If you don't believe me, take out the Xieji horn." The sword masters and elders looked at one another. Their eyes were filled with anger. Not only were his words completely insincere at the beginning, but his last sentence had even touched on their sore spot. This kid was as despicable as he could get. From the corner of his eye, Li Qingshan could see that the sword collection palace master's pinky finger on the Heaven's Leaning sword was trembling slightly. If he continued to agitate him, he might just fall out and draw his sword. He could not help but chuckle. "I'm just joking, just joking. Anyway, I hope we can work hard together and make the sword collection palace better and better." After that, the sword collection palace master could not be bothered with any more pleasantries. He directly said to Ji Xuanri, "Xuanri, take Elder Shangqing to the Pavilion of Heaven and Earth to read the Hidden Sword Manual of Heaven and Earth." Afterwards, he left with a flick of his sleeve. The elders and sword masters dispersed as well. The hall quietened down. Ji Xuanri smiled. "Elderly, it's been so long since we've met, but we still haven't formally met. I'm Ji Xuanri. If you don't mind, you can just call me Xuanri." Although he spoke politely and his bearing was rather peaceful, he could not hide his pride as a prodigy. He was like the sun in the sky, always standing high up as it illuminated the world. All right. Li Qingshan had almost killed the crown prince of the Great Xia not long ago. So why would he care about a crown prince of the Green Province? Then I won't stand on ceremony and call you Qingshan. Speaking of which, our swords are quite related. Really? What's the connection? Li Qingshan asked. Qingshan, you probably know very little about the 10 renowned swords of the Sword Collection Palace. This sword of mine is called Soul Destroyer. It was born from the same cauldron as Soul Switcher. You can say they're swords of brothers. Ji Xuanri patted the Soul Destroyer sword on his waist. Then I'm flattered. Li Qingshan smiled and asked, You must have many brothers and sisters. You're called Ji Xuanri. So is there another one called Ji Xianyue? He had already roughly understood that little Anne's original name was Ji Xianyue, while Xianyue was a homonym given by the Dark Queen to commemorate her daughter who had passed away. Ji Xuanri thought for a moment. Let's talk as we walk. The two of them stepped out of the hall. Ji Xuanri did not fly either. He walked slowly towards Heaven-leaning Peak and said after a moment of thought, This is a private matter of my family, so it's not suitable for others to know about it. However, The private matters of the King Chu's estate are the official matters of the Green Province. Who knows how many rumors there have been a long time ago? Since you want to hear it, Qingshan, there's nothing to hide. I do have a younger sister called Xianyue, but she passed away when she was young. This is also one of my greatest regrets in my life. Ji Xuanri's expression was rather sorrowful, as if he truly felt great regret. Really? Li Qingshan gazed at it closely, but he struggled to tell the truth from the lies. He only regretted the fact that the 9 transformations of the demonic and divine did not have the Xieji transformation, which could allow him to distinguish between truth and falsehood. If he saw someone putting on an act, he would throw a punch at them. Perhaps you don't quite believe me. Although the Sword Collection Palace and the Umbral sect are rather hostile, we're on very good terms. However, ever since Xianyue passed away, the Dark Queen's mind has become rather abnormal. She believes my mother is the one who caused Xuanyue's death. That's why it's better to just kill her. Li Qingshan sniggered. That's not true. Right now, the Green Province is beset with problems both internally and externally. The Locust Plague is everywhere internally, while the Mist Province poses a threat externally. It's exactly what we need the 2 great sects to put aside their differences and work together. If the Dark Queen hadn't provoked us and insisted on killing the disciples of our Sword Collection Palace, we wouldn't have taken the initiative. Actually, even if you hadn't stopped us, I would have spared the Dark Queen's life. Ji Xuanri's words truly possessed the bearing of the future King Chu, placing the entire Green Province in the palm of his hand. Oh, aren't you afraid of your mother getting angry? Li Qingshan asked. This is for the overall situation of the Green Province. I believe my mother will understand. We've arrived at the Pavilion of Heaven and Earth. Ji Xuanri stopped. As he spoke, he had already arrived before a building. The building had been carved out of a mountain, standing over 300 meters tall. It was lofty and grand, with the 2 words Heaven and Earth carved on it. It seemed like it had been carved out with a sword sharp and majestic. Chapter 1054. I want to refine the soul-switching sword after I practice the sword scripture of heaven and earth, said Li Qingshan. Li Qingshan said, with the wildflower blade soul around, he probably would never be able to refine the soul-switching sword. Fair enough. It's not like we're in a hurry. You can properly comprehend the path of the sword. I believe there will be a day when we can fight side by side. Ji Xuanri clasped his hands and left gracefully. Li Qingshan rubbed his chin and pondered for a while. Various questions ran through his head. As it seemed, Ming Fei and Ji Xuanri really did not seem like the culprits behind Little Anne's death. And Ji Xuanri seemed like he was trying to befriend him. He could not see any ill intentions. However, the affairs of the world were unpredictable, and the hearts of people were unpredictable. He could not be certain just like that. He could not help but sigh inside. Why wasn't there the Xieji transformation? Whatever. I'll see just how impressive the supreme technique of the Sword Collection Palace is first. Even if I don't practice the path of the sword, I can still teach it to Little and the soul-switching sword. With that in mind, Li Qingshan strode into the Pavilion of Heaven and Earth. The cries of ghosts still echoed through his ears. Fu Qingjin roused from the deep darkness. He felt like his head was splitting. Every inch of his body seemed to groan. He reached beside him almost instinctively, and a cold, smooth sensation filled his hand. He eased up. The green ruined sword was still there. "Senior brother, you're awake," Yu Zijian said in surprise and joy. "Zijian, as long as you're fine." Fu Qingjin saw Yu Zijian and forced out a smile with difficulty, but it came from the bottom of his heart. "Senior brother, your cultivation." The rims of Yu Zijian's eyes reddened. Fu Qingjin closed his eyes and inspected himself. Only then did he discover that his cultivation had basically been destroyed. Even his soul was heavily injured. It was even possible that he could never recover. If a regular cultivator encountered something like this, they would probably go mad. "It's fine. I can slowly train my cultivation back. As long as I'm still alive, there's still a chance." "Oh right, who saved me?" Fu Qingjin opened his eyes and only smiled bitterly. When the green ruined sword broke, The mental blow he suffered was far greater than right now. But he still managed to endure it. Since everything would return to dust, then his cultivation was not worth paying special attention to. Yu Zijian explained what had happened and became apologetic. Li Qingshan had the ability to save Fu Qingjin. Although she understood the grudge between the two men and couldn't blame Li Qingshan for his choice, she still felt sorry for Fu Qingjin. I see. A lot of things happened last night. I really have to thank you, Elder Shangqing, said Fu Qingjin. You don't blame him? Yu Zijian asked in surprise. Didn't he save you? At the very least, he saved my life. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to hold on until Palace Master and the others came to rescue me. As Fu Qingjin said that, he stroked the green ruins, sword gently, and sensed the weakening of its soul. He sighed slightly inside. It was not just him who had been struck by the shockwaves from the myriad ghost banner at such a close distance. Even the green ruined sword had been damaged. His expression changed as he suddenly felt something strange. Senior brother, what's wrong? Yu Zijian asked sharply. Nothing. Fu Qingjin shook his head. He sent his soul sense into the green ruined sword, but he gradually frowned. Suddenly, warm sunlight flooded into the room. Ji Xuanri walked in. He seemed like he was basking in the morning sunlight, which gave people a sense of closeness. He said gently, Qingjin, are you feeling better? First senior brother, you've come. Yu Zijian stood up. She was extremely respectful towards this first senior brother of hers. Senior brother Xuanri, I'm slightly unwell. Please forgive me for my rudeness. Fu Qingjin lay on the bed and clasped his hands with a smile. I don't have to worry now that you're behaving like this. The sword can break but not the heart. Don't worry. Even if I have to give up everything, I'll help you recover your cultivation. Take these pills for now. Ji Xuanri patted Fu Qingjin's shoulder and took out many bottles. They were all the best pills and medicines in the world, not just from the Sword Collection Palace, but also from Ji Xuanri's personal savings. Thank you, first senior brother. Yu Zijian felt her heart warm up. To her, this kind of love was exactly the charm of the Sword Collection Palace. And the first senior brother before her had played a huge part in it. Swords were emotionless, but people had feelings. Fu Qingjin nodded, but he was unable to open his sumaru ring. Yu Zijian stowed the pills away for him in a hurry. Fu Qingjin suddenly said, Senior brother, I want to go out for a walk. Right now. Ji Xuanri was surprised. My body is like a ruin. I can use this opportunity to comprehend the green ruin's sword intent. My cultivation has advanced drastically since I was injured last time. No, it's too dangerous, said Ji Xuanri. It's fine. With Zijian protecting me, the Dark Queen probably won't come again. How can this path of the Sword of Slaughter not be dangerous at all? Fu Qingjin was extremely feeble, but his gaze was extremely determined. All right then. After a moment of thought, Ji Xuanri still ended up agreeing to it. He left behind another stack of talismans. But let's talk about it after you've recovered. I won't disturb your recovery. When Ji Xuanri stepped out, his eyes narrowed slightly. He turned around and gave Fu Qingjin and Yu Zijian another gentle smile before flying off on his sword. Fu Qingjin watched Ji Xuanri's figure vanish. Beside him, Yu Zijian sighed in praise. First senior brother really is a good person. Yeah. Fu Qingjin nodded. Before tonight, that was what he believed as well. To his junior brothers and sisters, Ji Xuanri was like an elder brother. However, he began to hesitate now. Was everything really like how it seemed on the surface? Senior brother, when do we set off? Yu Zijian asked. Right now, said Fu Qingjin. So soon? Yu Zijian was surprised. Don't miss out on a good time. Can Zijian protect me? Fu Qingjin smiled. Yes. Yu Zijian's eyes shone brightly. Fu Qingjin looked at the woman before him with a smile. She had grown stronger and stronger, and her thoughts had matured and sharpened. However, there seemed to be some things that had not changed at all. He glanced at the violet cloud sword on her back and thought to himself, I will protect you too, even if it costs me my life. Let's go. Yu Zijian took out a delicate white paper boat. With a gentle toss, The paper boat became the size of a regular boat, hovering in the air. Yu Zijian carefully carried Fu Qingjin onto the boat. This must be the engineering techniques of the School of Moism. Where did you get them from? Fu Qingjin asked curiously. A friend from the Clear River Prefecture gave it to me. It must be fun, right? Lie down, senior brother. I'm going to set sail. Yu Zijian sat on the front of the boat. The boat drifted down from the top of the mountain, pushed away by the mountain wind. On the heaven's Reliance Peak, Ji Xuanri watched this from above. He waved his hand with a smile. Only when the boat left the Sword Collection Palace did his smile gradually vanish. He said without even looking back, Mother, Qingjin seems to have sensed something. If they've sensed something, then so be it. They can't change the overall situation. Ming Fei leaned against a pillar and stood in the shadows. If it weren't for Li Qingshan, would you really spare that bitch? Chapter 1055. The moment Li Qingshan stepped into the Heaven and Earth Palace, the scene in front of him twisted and changed. What he saw was not a majestic palace but a whole world. Under the blue sky and white clouds, above the thick earth and mountains, there were birds and beasts, flowers and birds, fish and insects. Everything was prepared. Li Qingshan stood in front of a clear stream. The gentle breeze rustled the verdant grass, and the stream gurgled. Under the illumination of the sunlight, it shimmered with clear light. A few red carps swam about in it, making it seem full of life. Li Qingshan's heart moved. He squatted down and broke off a blade of grass. The moment the grass was broken, the grass suddenly turned into an extremely thin sword light, shooting toward Li Qingshan's brow. It was like a sword chi released by a peerless swordsman. Interesting. Li Qingshan smiled. He blew at it, and the streak of light deflected. However, his action of uprooting the grass seemed to affect the entire world. The grass grew madly, turning into endless sword chi that surged towards Li Qingshan. It was filled with endless, profound sword intent. Li Qingshan leaped lightly into the air. The red carps in the stream suddenly jumped out of the water, turning into a red sword light, swimming toward him. It was full of agility and change, and it was a new sword will. Li Qingshan waved his sleeves to deflect the sword chi. In an instant the stream, grass, trees, flowers, birds, fish and insects all came to life, turning into a myriad of purple and red sword chi, containing a myriad of sword wills. Even the drizzle falling from the sky and the breeze in the air also turned into sword chi. Some were continuous, some were agile, some were heavy, and some were heavy. There were no words to describe them all. It was as if he had entered a world of swords. Everything in the world could be a sword, and they all contained profound sword wills. Do you want to fight me here? Li Qingshan's demonic chi surged, forcing away the layers of sword chi. Damn it, what is this place? Frenzied Flower Saber Soul let out an angry roar. I want to know too. Be quiet, we might need you later. Li Qingshan relaxed his shoulders. Clearly, this was not just a place to learn swordsmanship. Perhaps this was a trap that the palace master had laid down for him, a manifestation of the malice. However, he did not sense any life-threatening danger so far. Wanting to kill him with this level of ambush was just a pipe dream. Then, he saw that even the drifting white clouds in the sky and the continuous mountain range in the distance were transforming into boundless sword chi. One was faintly discernible, while the other was vigorous and heavy. Interesting. The war demon has appeared, Li Qingshan roared. Demonic chi soared into the sky, surging and condensing into a malevolent war demon. With a wave of his right arm, a huge blade appeared in his hand, and he began to brandish it. The surging saber chi tore apart the sword chi that filled the sky. It cut through the mountains, cut through the clouds, and caused the weather to change. You use a saber? A surprised voice came from the sky. Are you not cultivating in the Tao of the sword? A voice immediately echoed from beneath the ground. The two voices were both old, but one was clear, while the other was heavy. It was like the difference between heaven and earth. As the two voices rang out, the constantly evolving sword chi in the surroundings turned back into mountains, rivers, white clouds, flowers, birds, fish, and insects. The world returned to its original state. Even the grass that Li Qingshan had snapped regrew, swaying gently. You must be the heaven and earth elders of the Sword Collection Palace. Although Li Qingshan did not know much about the Sword Collection Palace, he did have some understanding of the peak cultivators of the sword. The Chan Monastery of Devanaga had the 4 guardian kings, while the Sword Collection Palace had the 3 great sword cultivators. Apart from the palace master, there were the heaven and earth elders. The heaven and earth elders did not seem to have any killing intent. Was this not a trap the palace master had laid down? Kid, since you know our names, why don't you tell us your names? Elder Earth said. I'm Li Qingshan, a newly promoted honored elder of the Sword Collection Palace. Li Qingshan clasped his hands before lowering them again. Speaking of which, don't tell me you really don't know? He refused to believe the palace master had not told them. So what if we know? So what if we don't know? Elder Earth said. So what? What is this place? Li Qingshan asked. The Pavilion of Heaven and Earth, Elder Earth said. The Heaven and Earth Sword Realm, Elder Earth said. Then may I ask where can I see the sword scripture of heaven and earth? Li Qingshan asked. Everything you see is the sword scripture of heaven and earth. However, how many sword forms you can comprehend will depend on your ability to comprehend, Elder Earth said. Since you use a blade, it'll be pointless even if you come here, Elder Earth said. Then I better leave, Li Qingshan said. Hold on. Since you've come, you might as well comprehend it. Since you're able to draw the soul-transforming sword, it means you have a fate with swords. The path of the sword is so extensive and profound that it's not something that blade techniques can compare to. Li Qingshan thought. If I tell the wildflower sword soul that, he'll probably jump out and kill you 2 old pretentious fakers immediately. Compared to some nonsense like he had a fate with swords, he trusted his own feelings more. However, to his surprise, the 2 elders of heaven and earth were actually very eager, for an outsider like him, to comprehend the supreme secret technique of the Sword Collection Palace. Li Qingshan thought. What the hell is the palace master trying to do? It seems like he's clearly trying to rope me in through various means, but where is his malice? The sword scripture of heaven and earth really is quite wondrous. It's worth comprehending. It'll definitely be of great help to little Anne's path of the sword. As a result, he said, since you're so sincere, I'll comprehend it. The 2 elders of heaven and earth were momentarily speechless. They were rendered speechless by his shameless words. Oh right. May I ask how many sword forms there are in the sword scripture of heaven and earth? Li Qingshan asked. I don't know. No one has managed to comprehend all of the sword forms, said Elder Heaven. There's no need for you to be greedy. As long as you can comprehend half of the sword forms, you'll be able to rule the world with your sword, said Elder Earth. Then may I ask how many sword forms the 2 of you have comprehended? Li Qingshan then asked. 2,142 forms, the 2 elders of heaven and earth said rather proudly. They spent most of their time in secluded cultivation in the Heaven and Earth Hall, so they knew better than anyone just how profound the sword scripture of heaven and earth was. The fact that it was so difficult to comprehend and derive it to the limit was the most attractive aspect of the sword scripture of heaven and earth. Li Qingshan suddenly laughed aloud. Kid, what are you laughing at? Elder Earth asked. I'm laughing at the lack of talent in the Sword Collection Palace. Li Qingshan shook his head. How dare you? How dare you? The 2 elders of heaven and earth were furious. Otherwise, why can't you even learn a single sword form? Li Qingshan would not let go of any opportunity to mock the pretentious prick. Arrogant and ignorant swordsman. How would you know how profound the sword scripture of heaven and earth is? There's no point in talking anymore. We'd like to see how many sword forms you can comprehend. Chapter 1056. Li Qingshan closed his eyes slowly, and his mind calmed down. There were no longer any ripples. In terms of comprehension, he had never believed he was particularly powerful. When he first saw the cursive sword calligraphy, he was completely unable to understand it. Instead, it was Little An who had comprehended a sword style and passed it on to him. However, through his observations just now, he discovered that comprehending the sword scripture of heaven and earth did not actually require comprehension, but deduction. The two often seemed similar, but they were actually fundamentally different. Comprehension was a flash of inspiration when an apple fell on your head, while deduction was a large number of calculations, eliminations, and experiments. Although the final objective was to obtain a correct answer, the abilities they required were actually different. The Banyan Tree King had comprehended the laws of the world through the Mist Province Cauldron because of his tremendous branching to derive them, not some sort of comprehension. No one could comprehend all the sword forms in the Sword of Heaven and Earth, but it was not because the Sword Collection Palace was lacking in people. In the past 10,000 years, there had been so many astounding figures, so how could there not be someone with extraordinary comprehension? Little Anne's comprehension could be described as supreme, but it had not reached an unprecedented level. Instead, it was because the complexity of the sword scripture of heaven and earth had surpassed the limits of what a single person could derive. When it came to deduction, Li Qingshan was filled with confidence. This was exactly what the spirit turtle was best at. He silently practiced the spirit turtle's method of sea suppression, and his mind reflected the entire sword of heaven and earth. Afterwards he began to derive it. Li Qingshan raised his hand, and a strand of gentle wind was grasped in his palm. Sword scripture of heaven and earth first form. The sword of heaven and earth that had just settled down began to surge again, but this time, it was with Li Qingshan at the center. Li Qingshan raised his arm gently, and a gentle wind stirred in his palm. It was gentle at times, swift at other times, constantly changing. The second form, the third form, the fourth form. Li Qingshan began to dance around, and the entire sword of heaven and earth danced with him. The grass grew, the stream gurgled, the carp swam, and the pebbles were silent. Every posture and every scenery possessed a sword form. In a short while Li Qingshan had deduced 538 styles. The heaven and earth elders were dumbfounded. They had spent more than a year to understand so many sword forms. But an heretic who was not even a sword cultivator had deduced them in an instant. It was beyond their imagination. Elder Tian said, "Junior brother, you don't have to be too surprised. His cultivation is already at the third heavenly tribulation, which is a realm higher than ours at that time. His divine sense is many times faster, so it's only natural that he'll be able to comprehend these simple sword forms very quickly. This is just the beginning." Senior brother is right. The more sword forms there are in the book of heaven and earth scripture, the more profound and obscure it will be. Soon, he will know how powerful it is. As expected, when he deduced the 767th move, Li Qingshan's movements gradually slowed down, but they were still as smooth as flowing water. He pushed the spirit turtle's powers of divination to the limit. Compared to the unpredictable heavenly secrets and fate, the sword scripture of heaven and earth hidden in the realm of heaven and earth was not particularly complicated. Elder D asked in surprise, "Where did he come from? How can he comprehend it so quickly? Even great cultivators can't comprehend it so quickly." Elder Tian asked in doubt, "Is he really a natural-born prodigy of the sword?" Elder D answered with a question, "Then what do we count as?" Elder Tian was unable to answer either. All those who could become great sword cultivators were prodigies of the sword. They were the best of the best. Let's keep watching. He'll reach a great bottleneck very soon. The sword forms he's comprehending right now are only the most basic. When Li Qingshan reached the 1001st form, he suddenly paused, as he had already comprehended all the most basic elements in the realm of heaven and earth scripture, from a blade of grass, or a droplet of dew to a cloud or a mountain range. Li Qingshan, I admit that you are indeed a person of my path of the sword. To be able to comprehend over 1,000 sword forms in such a short amount of time, it's enough for you to enter the history of the Sword Collection Palace," Elder Tian said in amazement. There was even a sense of relief in his voice. "All right, let's stop here for today. Don't bite off more than you can chew. You'll need at least a decade to completely grasp these 1,000 sword forms. It'll be enough for you to use for the rest of your life," said Elder D. "Can you shut up? Don't disturb other people when they're cultivating." You're already so old, yet you don't even have this bit of common sense? Li Qingshan barked rudely. Elder Tian and Elder Tian were both furious. The world changed color because of them. Just how many years had it been since someone dared to talk to them like that? You really don't know what's good for you. Then continue comprehending. If you can't comprehend 1951 forms, don't even think about leaving the realm of heaven and earth. Scripture. Elder D said furiously. Don't compare me to you? Li Qingshan thought about it for a while before suddenly thinking of something. I've got it. Li Qingshan began to move again. He formed a sword with his fingers and pointed them at the sky. Rumble! A bolt of lightning pierced through the sky. The clouds surged and piled up. A slanting drizzle fell and merged into the stream. The stream seeped into the soil, causing plants to sprout and flourish. The bugs hidden in the soil crawled up the leaves and made their own sounds. It was just now when Elder Tian and Elder Tian tested him that he was enlightened. Just gathering all the basic elements could not be called a world. These elements had to interact with each other to produce more changes. Therefore, he disrupted, reorganized, and evolved. After introducing these changes, the difficulty of derivation multiplied. However, although Li Qingshan's movements were slow, he did not stop. The spirit turtle was as calm as it could be. It was also as patient as it could be. It continued to deduce each move. Elder Tian and Elder Tian were already speechless. They could not help but shout in their hearts, slow down, slow down. However, Li Qingshan did not care about their feelings. Not long after, he surpassed the 1951 forms that Elder D had mentioned. After a few more days, he surpassed Elder Tian's 2142 forms. The heaven and earth sword realm began to show changes that Elder Tian and Elder Tian had never seen before. The sun rose and set. The moon and stars moved. Frost covered the ground. Winter snow fell. Other than the basic cycle of life and death, Li Qingshan introduced the 4 seasons and the 4 seasons. Elder Tian and Elder Tian had no other thoughts. They stared blankly at this scene. What happened next was like a dream. One moment, it was the lonely desert. The next moment, it was the raging sea. Li Qingshan was like a god. He stood at the center of the world and manipulated everything in the world. Whether it was the coldness of the glaciers or the fierceness of the erupting volcanoes, they all contained mysterious sword forms. After who knew how long, Li Qingshan suddenly opened his eyes. The sword realm of heaven and earth had suddenly shattered. He was currently standing in a dark, deep, lofty hall. 2 sword-wielding old men sat nearby, staring at him blankly. Their mouths were agape, completely unaware of what had just happened. Li Qingshan stepped out of the pavilion. He only said 3 words that echoed in the heaven and earth pavilion. Chapter 1057. Outside the pavilion of heaven and earth, who knew how many days had passed, but the sun remained bright and beautiful. Everything in the heaven and earth sword realm was like a dream. Li Qingshan glanced at his hands. The feeling of controlling everything was truly intoxicating. It was no wonder that the heaven and earth elders refused to leave. The 3,000 sword forms were reflected in his mind. The profoundness of their changes and the wonders of their derivation broadened his horizons. The level of mastery was no less than the inherited blade style from the last ending frenzied blade. This was probably the most powerful sword style in the world of the 9 provinces. Once he used it, he could look down on the entire world. Of course, who knew how much time it would take for him to truly master it? But it would definitely be much easier than the heaven and earth elders. This was because he had grasped a complete sword manual. There was a fundamental difference between him and those who tried to comprehend it blindly. Though, just who left behind the sword manual of heaven and earth? Li Qingshan had a vague guess. When he derived the 3,000 sword forms, he sensed that they were similar to the sword intent within the 3 absolutes calligraphy. Although they were completely different forms of expression, they achieved the same result through different means. As a result, he derived the sword style he had learned from the 3 absolutes calligraphy. Sure enough, they resonated with each other, which was why he was able to completely derive the 3,000 sword forms in such a short amount of time. The 5 absolutes immortal truly had left a deep mark on the Green Province. Li Qingshan glanced back. Could it be? Congratulations on comprehending the supreme way of the sword in the Sword Manual of Heaven and Earth. The Palace Master's gaze was rather mixed. As the Palace Master, he had only comprehended 1,751 forms. Behind him, Ming Fei and Ji Xuanrui's expressions changed constantly. They were both surprised and annoyed, as well as in some disbelief. It doesn't seem too difficult. Have the 3 of you been waiting for me here? Li Qingshan was very confused. No matter what the Palace Master was scheming, even the North Moon could die if the 5 great sword cultivators worked together with the protective sword formation. Meanwhile, the strength he had displayed had always been that of a demon king. Was there a need to keep giving him benefits? Given the huge difference in strength, just what was the point of scheming? Or did they want more? Qingshan, I have a presumptuous request. Can you record down these 3,000 sword forms and pass them down? Ji Xuanrui said with anticipation. The Sword Collection Palace Master and Ming Fei were tempted as well. This was the biggest difference between understanding the entire sword style and only a portion of the sword style. The latter could not be taught, because the evolution in the Heaven and Earth sword realm was too complicated. Apart from the most basic sword moves, once they entered the stage of blending and evolution, every sword shio would have their own experiences. No path was exactly the same. At most, they could only verify each other. Only by ascending to the pinnacle, taking everything into one's eyes and understanding all of the changes, would one be able to impart it to others. Even if it was just a single move, it wouldn't be enough. That's not a problem at all. After all, I'm an upper-class elder of the Sword Collection Palace. If it weren't for Palace Master's generosity, I wouldn't have been able to learn this Heaven and Earth Hidden Sword Manual, Li Qingshan said very generously. The Master of the Sword Collection Palace's eyes lit up, and the corner of his lips curled up slightly. Not only could the complete Sword Manual of Heaven and Earth advance his cultivation drastically, but it could also cause the strength of the entire Sword Collection Palace to undergo a qualitative change. Then I'll be troubling you, Qingshan, said Ji Xuanrui. Li Qingshan changed the topic. However, I'm not a sword cultivator after all. So far, I've only roughly derived the Heaven and Earth Hidden Sword Manual. I'll only be able to summarize the mysteries of the sword style after mastering it. And if I want to write down a sword style on paper, probably even 10,000 pieces of paper won't be enough, let alone something that can be completed in a single day. If I make any mistakes in my haste, I'll be in deep trouble. Li Qingshan brushed him off seriously. Only an idiot would pass on a supreme sword style, even though he clearly knew that the master of the Sword Collection Palace was hostile towards him. He could use this to keep them in suspense, so that the Sword Collection Palace would have to reconsider, no matter what scheme they were up to. The master of the Sword Collection Palace frowned. He could tell that Li Qingshan was trying to evade him, which made him very displeased. However, Li Qingshan's reason was upright and righteous. He could not find any problems with it, and since he was counting on him to pass on the Heaven and Earth Hidden Sword Manual, he could not push him too hard. Then take your time to comprehend it. I'll assist you in accomplishing it sooner. By then, you can become a true great elder of our Sword Collection Palace. I'm a disciple of the Chan Monastery of Devanaga, said Li Qingshan. A great elder's status in the Sword Collection Palace was no less than the master of the Sword Collection Palace, or even a little higher. They could decide the direction the entire sect took, so their authority was much greater than that of a high official elder. Yet, the master of the Sword Collection Palace was actually willing to let an outsider like him hold the position. I'm just a secular disciple. I believe our Sword Collection Palace is more tolerant than the Chan Monastery of Devanaga, the master of the Sword Collection Palace said meaningfully. All right, I believe that day will come. Li Qingshan smiled inside. The 3,000 swords sure was charming. It was rather dim in the tall, lofty pavilion. Dust drifted through the air. Li Qingshan made his way through the rows of tall, heavy bookshelves, quickly flipping through the books before closing them again. He picked up jade slips one by one before placing them down again. The Hidden Sword Pavilion. This was where most disciples of the Sword Collection Palace practiced the path of the sword. It was the foundation of the Sword Collection Palace. Only sword masters and elders who had undergone the second heavenly tribulation had the right to enter the pavilion of heaven and earth. Many disciples of the Sword Collection Palace would never be able to set foot in there in their entire lives. After deriving the 3,000 swords forms, Li Qingshan was truly tempted to pick up the path of the sword again. The sword scripture of heaven and earth was just too powerful. But the wildflower blade spirit refused to let him refine the soul-switching sword no matter what. All Li Qingshan could do was give up. After all, while the soul-switching sword was a renowned sword, it still could not compare to the terminal wildflower blade. The latter could be regarded as a renowned blade in the Azura realm. But no matter what, the sword scripture of heaven and earth was still worth comprehending, even if it was just for passing it on to little Anne. However, the Hidden Sword Pavilion possessed the most complete system of sword cultivation. With his ability to deduce it, it would not take him too much time. Li Qingshan made his way around another row of bookshelves, and suddenly saw a familiar figure standing against the light at the end of the corridor. It was a handsome man smiling at him. "Chengzan," Li Qingshan said. "Qingshan, long time no see. Or perhaps I should call you Elder Shangqing." Hua Sengzan walked over with a sword on his back, which added some elegance to his bearing. "You've undergone the second heavenly tribulation as well. You really are the greatest genius of the Clear River Prefecture after all." Li Qingshan patted his shoulder with a smile. "Stop teasing me. What kind of genius am I compared to you? It's all thanks to the sword on my back that I possess my current cultivation. It might not be on par with your soul-switching sword, but it's still a rare treasured sword," Hua Sengzan explained, but he never mentioned the sword's name. Suddenly he asked, "Oh right, you still haven't refined the soul-switching sword, right?" Chapter 1058. Not yet. I want to refine the soul-switching sword after I achieve a minor accomplishment in the way of the sword. What, is there a problem? Li Qingshan grabbed the hilt of the soul-switching sword. The ice-cold feeling seeped into his palm, which was extremely comfortable. He was almost convinced that he might actually be fated with the soul-switching sword. Hua Sengzan said, "It's fine. This works too. With your strength, it doesn't matter if you have this sword or not anyway." "Junior Hua, you're here too." Ji Xuanri's voice suddenly rang out. He stepped into the gloomy Hidden Sword Pavilion with a warm smile on his face. "First senior brother." Hua Sengzan lowered his head and bowed. His hand trembled slightly in his sleeve. "You can be considered old friends now. If it weren't for something, I'd definitely treat you to a drink." Ji Xuanri nodded towards Hua Sengzan and said to Li Qingshan, "Qingshan, do you know?" "Know what?" Li Qingshan asked. "I just received news that the One-Will Master has already been conferred the position of Monk King. The Chan Monastery of Devanaga is holding a grand ceremony on Great Buddha Mountain, inviting cultivators from all over the Green Province. I've been invited as well." Ji Xuanri walked over and glanced at Hua Sengzan seemingly unintentionally. Hua Sengzan's trembling hand instead calmed down. "So fast?" Li Qingshan was surprised. He understood that this was probably not just to celebrate for little Anne, or they would never have been in such a hurry. They were probably using this as an excuse to discuss how to deal with the soaring Locust King, just in case they alerted the enemy. "You've spent quite a lot of time in the Pavilion of Heaven and Earth, so it looks like you already knew. I remember your partners with the One-Will Monk King, right? Even I can't help but admire your cultivation speed." Ji Xuanri smiled. "You're too kind. When do you plan on setting off?" Li Qingshan asked. "Probably today. Do you want to come with me?" Ji Xuanri asked. "Nah, you can go first. I want to stay here for a while longer. The Hidden Sword Pavilion is extensive and profound. Also, I want to catch up with Qingzan." Li Qingshan looked at Hua Sengzan beside him. "All right, then you can read the sword technique here first." "Oh right, junior brother Hua, make a trip to Heavenly Peak." The palace master has some instructions for the sword masters and elders of the various peaks before he leaves, Ji Xuanri said. Yes, senior. Hua Sengzan accepted the order and walked out of the pavilion. At the moment when he was about to step out of Hidden Sword Court, she turned around and smiled. Qingshan, don't forge a sword. The sunlight shone on his face at an angle. It was half dark and half bright, outlining the outline of his handsome face. It was full of ease and joy. Ji Xuanri's pupils shrank. The warm smile froze on his face. Why? Li Qingshan asked. I don't think you're suited for the sword Dao. Why don't you try using a blade instead? Hua Sengzan said. Let's go get a drink together. Li Qingshan walked up and placed his hand on Hua Sengzan's shoulder. Let's wait for tonight. It's been so many years. I want to have a good chat with you too. Hua Sengzan waved his hand with a smile and stepped out into the bright sunlight. Just when Li Qingshan was about to chase after him, Ji Xuanri blocked his way and shook his head with a smile. Junior brother Hua is smarter than most people. It's just that you like to act on your own sometimes. Really? Or is there something wrong with this soul-switching sword? With a clang, Li Qingshan drew the soul-switching sword and pointed it at Ji Xuanri's throat. I heard that Li Qingshan is a person who distinguishes between gratitude and grudges. Our Hidden Sword Palace has been very kind to you. Not only did we make you an upper-class elder, but we even allowed you to comprehend the hidden sword of heaven and earth. Is this how you repay us? Ji Xuanri questioned. I distinguish between gratitude and grudges. Li Qingshan sneered. That's right. I distinguish between gratitude and grudges. If someone shows me a drop of kindness, I'll obviously return the favor. I can be a good upper-class elder of the Hidden Sword Palace, and I can help you write the hidden sword of heaven and earth. Even refining this soul-switching sword won't be a problem. However, no matter what you're scheming, I'd advise you to stop while it's still early. I'm not the enemy you want. You should believe that I want a friend, not an enemy. As for whether you're willing to write the sword manual or refine the soul-switching sword, it's all up to you. I won't force you. Ji Xuanri gently brushed away the blade. Li Qingshan sheathed his sword. This was the Sword Collection Palace. He could engage in a great battle without any qualms, but he had to consider Hua Sengzan's safety. Hua Sengzan had clearly taken an extremely great risk to warn him. Once they fell out, there would be no turning back. Ji Xuanri bowed gracefully and excused himself. Li Qingshan sank into his thoughts for a while. He gripped the soul-switching sword and drew out another blade. It was as thin as a cicada's wing, glistening with moonlight. Is this sword where the Sword Collection Palace's scheme lies? Whatever, no matter what, I have to ensure Hua Sengzan's safety first. Li Qingshan thought. Just when he was about to leave the Hidden Sword Pavilion and catch up to Hua Sengzan, there was a flash of light before him, which converged into a wall. Streaks of light shot out from the various peaks, gathering on the Hidden Sword Peak in the sky. A streak of light shot down from the peak, enveloping the Hidden Sword Pavilion and sealing Li Qingshan within. Li Qingshan raised an eyebrow. You don't know what's good for you. A while later, there was a great rumble, and the streak of light from the Hidden Sword Peak twisted and shattered. The Hidden Sword Pavilion that had stood for several millennia was reduced to countless splinters that scattered in all directions. Li Qingshan stood in the ruins with his ends blossoming blade before him. He looked around, but there was no ambush like he had imagined. The surroundings were peaceful. Only the thousands of pages drifted through the air like snow. He raised his head and glanced at the Hidden Sword Peak. Clearly, the protective sword formation had not unleashed its full power. What is the Sword Collection Palace trying to do? Is it just to trap me here for a while? Li Qingshan expanded his soul sense and scanned the surroundings, but he failed to find Hua Sengzan's presence. Below Heaven's leaning peak, light flickered as sword qi crisscrossed. Li Xiaoyao was currently focused, circulating his true qi to power the sword in his hand as he practiced the sword seriously with his seniors and juniors. There was a great rumble, and everyone stopped what they were doing. They looked in the direction of the Hidden Sword Pavilion. Li Xiaoyao shifted his gaze, but he continued practicing. Suddenly, a tall figure appeared before him. Where's Hua Sengzan's dwelling? Li Xiaoyao was taken aback. He never thought Li Qingshan would appear before him again and take the initiative to speak to him. Everyone bowed with their swords in a hurry. Elder Shangqing. Elder Shangqing. Elder Hua has gone out with the palace master and the others, Li Xiaoyao said politely. Are there any other elders or sword masters with them? Li Qingshan's heart sank, and he asked further. I don't think so. God damn it. Li Qingshan cursed. Against the soaring locust king, only great cultivators could interfere. Even if it was a regular ceremony, there was no reason to only bring Hua Sengzan. Elder Shangqing, is there something wrong? Li Xiaoyao could not help but ask. In the past few years, Hua Sengzan had taken great care of him, so he obviously cared. Which peak is Yu Zijian on? However, Li Qingshan learnt that Yu Zijian had taken Fu Qingjin on a journey, and his frown deepened. Fu Qingjin was so heavily injured, so why was he not resting properly in the Sword Collection Palace? What was he traveling for? A shadow loomed over him. Li Qingshan made up his mind. Whatever. I'll go to the Chan Monastery of Devanaga and see what they're up to. Chapter 1059. Li Qingshan looked around, only to see the bewildered Li Xiaoyao. Although he had already made up his mind to end his grievances, he could not sever the feeling of being connected by blood. When he thought about how the name Xiaorao originated from his bad taste, he said, You're coming with me. Me? Where are you going? Li Xiaoyao pointed at his own nose. What are you asking so many questions for? I can see that you have some talent, so I'm going to take you out for training. Li Qingshan grabbed Li Xiaoyao's shoulder and took off. The guardian sword formation no longer stopped him, vanishing into the horizon in the blink of an eye. The disciples of the Sword Collection Palace stared at him blankly. They still had no idea what had happened. The short, plump young man sighed. Sigh, Xiaoyao sure has hit the jackpot. He's actually caught the eye of an elder. Sigh, why don't I have that kind of luck? Elder Shangqing, where are we going to train? This was the first time Li Xiaoyao had been so high in the sky. He saw the scenery on the ground change rapidly. Apart from his instinctive fear, he also felt an irrepressible excitement. We're here. Li Qingshan turned around and descended rapidly. Li Xiaoyao first felt the world spin around him, before the entire ground slammed into him. He could not help but pale in fright as his heart seemed like it was about to leap out of his throat. With a thump, Li Qingshan landed on the ground, kicking up a cloud of dust. Li Xiaoyao collapsed on the ground, still feeling like the world was spinning around him. He recovered after quite some difficulty and looked around, only to discover that he was only at the foot of a barren mountain. It did not even seem as dangerous as the Sword Collection Palace's mountain peak. Elder Shangqing, where are we? Don't call me elder. Li Qingshan barked. He was completely sick of this form of address right now. That's Ceci Sr. Li Xiaoyao shuddered inside. His legs became rather weak. It was even more terrifying than flying through the sky. What are you afraid of? Am I going to eat you? Li Qingshan said in displeasure. But he had forgotten that he was currently furious. The ruthlessness of a demon king or demon king could really scare people to death if he accidentally leaked it. If Li Xiaoyao didn't believe that this second uncle wouldn't hurt him, he would have turned around and fled. He clenched his teeth. His voice trembled as he said, No, no. Li Qingshan sighed in his heart. You know who I am to you. Keeping a distance from me isn't a bad thing for you. You will naturally understand in the future. Anyway, the Sword Collection Palace was not a good place. Don't go back. Ah, Li Xiaoyao cried out. He had always wanted to be a swordsman, so he had only managed to enter the Sword Collection Palace after much difficulty. After decades of perseverance, he was about to reach the hidden sword peak and pull out the sword, but he was told not to go back. It was as if he was about to lose his life. Before he could say anything to defend himself, a large hand pressed down like a dark cloud, grabbing his head. Count yourself lucky. Originally, even if you had another 1,000 years, you still might not be able to see or touch this heaven and earth contained sword manual. Now that I've passed it to you, how much you can comprehend will depend on your own ability. The various changes of the heaven and earth contained sword manual were reflected in Li Qingshan's sea of consciousness, directly imprinting them into Li Xiaoyao's mind. Li Xiaoyao's body twitched as if he had been electrocuted. An unimaginably intense pain spread through his entire body, as if an entire world had been forcefully shoved into him. His body and soul had expanded by hundreds or thousands of times, and his head felt like it was about to explode. He wanted to faint, but he was terrifyingly clear-headed. He could feel every tiny bit of pain. In reality, if it were not for Li Qingshan's suppression with the spirit turtle, he really would have exploded and died. As for whether Li Xiaoyao would directly lose his mind or not, that was not within Li Qingshan's consideration. Such a great fortuitous encounter had fallen into his lap out of nowhere. If he could not even endure this bit of suffering, then he could go die. It hurts. Let me die. Li Xiaoyao wailed inside. He really did want to die. Suddenly, he felt a gentle breeze brush past his face, like a person about to die of thirst in the desert who had encountered a drop of dew. Even if it was not enough to save his life, it was enough to comfort him greatly. He tried to concentrate his mind on it, and in a daze, he saw the flow of sword qi. His mind shuddered. Even though he had no talent or ability to comprehend, this was the sword he loved the most. It was like a rainbow refracted from a drop of dew. It contained endless, profound changes, which gradually drew his mind over, allowing him to endure the pain. The first form of the sword manual of heaven and earth. He used the 3,000 sword forms one by one. Li Qingshan used an absolutely brutal method to directly imprint the sword manual of heaven and earth into Li Xiaoyao's mind. Li Xiaoyao felt like 10,000 years had passed, but the sun remained high in the sky. It had only shifted slightly. Li Qingshan loosened his grip, and Li Xiaoyao immediately collapsed on the ground like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Before he completely fainted, he heard Li Qingshan's deep voice. "You've got some patience. You haven't let down the name Li Xiaoyao. Don't forget what I said. Stay away from the sword collection palace." "Yes, second uncle," Li Xiaoyao murmured in reply. Li Qingshan smiled before immediately withdrawing his smile. He raised his head and gazed in the direction of Great Buddha Mountain. He had a feeling that the ceremony for the coronation of king this time would not be peaceful. Of course, every time he returned to Great Buddha Mountain, he would always run into something. But just what was waiting for him this time? The Chan Monastery of Devanaga. Because it was a holy land of Buddhism, it was not decorated with lanterns or banners. Instead, it had only been carefully cleaned up. However, the faces of the monks and disciples were brimming with joy. Ever since the soaring Locust King had escaped from the Demon Suppression Hall, the entire Great Buddha Mountain seemed to be enveloped by dark clouds. Under the soaring Locust King's vengeful attacks, news of fellow disciples dying in battle rang out endlessly. Countless creatures had died to the mouths of insects too. It was not just the one lamp monk who felt deeply guilty. Every single disciple of the Chan Monastery of Devanaga felt responsible, ashamed to face their fellow cultivators and believers. However, with the birth of a new monk king, a hole seemed to be ripped open in the dark clouds. They could finally catch their breath. The Chan Monastery of Devanaga definitely would not be defeated by any danger. 3 magnificent streaks of light shot through the sky and landed in front of the mountain, turning into the master of the sword collection palace, Ji Xianyue, and Ming Fei. The reception monk went up to receive them in a hurry. The master of the sword collection palace said loudly, "The sword collection palace has come to pay a visit." "Welcome, palace master. Apologies for not welcoming you from afar. So please come up and have a chat." The dauntless monk's voice drifted down from the top of the mountain. The 3 of them ascended the steps, passing through the mountain gates, and arriving before the grand hall at the top. All they saw was the 4 guardian kings of the Chan Monastery of Devanaga gathered together. Even the unraging monk had donned a brand new kasaya, standing there with a smile. After greeting one another, the master of the sword collection palace asked, "Where is fellow One Will?" The dauntless monk said, "One Will is still making preparations at the back of the hall. Please go to the side hall and rest for now. The ceremony is about to begin. When the time comes, she will come out to meet you." The unraging monk personally led the way for the three of them, taking them to the eastern side hall before bidding farewell and leaving. Ming Fei drew her sword and shook it gently. The blade vanished, but the space rippled, and Hua Sungzan tumbled out. Chapter 1060. The Sword Collection Palace, Watercut Peak. Yin Xiaoqiu held the breaking water sword tightly with both hands, his forehead pressed against the sword hilt, as he knelt in the dark cave. He had maintained this posture for a very, very long time. Anger, humiliation, hatred and bewilderment were like a tide of darkness, surging into his heart. I'm a prodigy of the sword, the successor of a renowned sword, the star of hope of the Sword Collection Palace. I'll become a great sword cultivator one day, and I might even become the palace master of the Sword Collection Palace. But why? Why did I lose? Furthermore, he had lost so miserably, losing face in front of so many of his fellow disciples. Palace Master clearly knows that person has already undergone 3 heavenly tribulations. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you want me to go and suffer such humiliation? He seemed to be asking himself, but also seemed to be asking the broken water sword. Since a long, long time ago, the two had become one, with the heart as the sword, and the sword as the heart. Because you're too weak, a voice suddenly rang out. The broken water sword trembled slightly. He couldn't tell if it was the voice of the sword, or the voice of his heart. He muttered to himself, "Am I too weak?" He shook his head violently. "No. I've already undergone the 2nd heavenly tribulation, and become the master of a peak in the Sword Collection Palace. How can I be considered weak?" "Weaker than Li Qingshan," the voice said. Yin Xiaoqiu felt as if he had been struck by lightning. This name was like a nightmare, looking down at him from high above, mocking his weakness. He could not even muster the confidence to fight a decisive battle. What is sword principle? Slay demons and uphold justice? You're wrong. The sword is a weapon of slaughter. It's neither good nor evil, and there's no such thing as chivalry. The sword is cold, it is slaughter. It is to look down on the world, it is invincible. Yin Xiaoqiu was at a loss for words. You need to be stronger. You can become even stronger. Stronger than Li Qingshan. The voice roared, and the trembling of the breaking water sword became louder and louder, turning into a strange tone. I want to be stronger. I can still be stronger. Stronger than Li Qingshan. Yin Xiaoqiu's eyes lit up, cold and fierce. Kill Li Qingshan, Yin Xiaoqiu said, hearing his voice merge with the voice. It reverberated in the dark cave abode. Just now if someone was here, you would hear Yin Xiaoqiu talking to himself in 2 different tones. A paper boat floated along with the wind. Fu Qingjin was lying quietly in the boat, staring at the blue sky in a daze. Yu Zijin sat at the front of the boat with her back to Fu Qingjin. His hand cupped his cheek. Without turning his head he said, "Senior Marshal Brother. What are you thinking? When I was young, I grew up in the Sword Collection Palace. All my seniors and juniors were like family to me. Although the palace master was serious in speech and manner, he was always exceptionally tolerant towards me, just like a loving father. Concubine Ming, on the other hand, is much more powerful. I've been afraid of her since I was young. She's like a strict mother." Senior Brother Xianri. Fu Qingjin's voice was low and fleeting, almost dispersing in the air. Senior Brother Xianri is a gentle and kind elder brother. Although I didn't grow up in the Sword Collection Palace, I can understand how you feel, Senior Brother. When I was in the Proud Sword Manor, we were like brothers and sisters, Yu Zijian said with some reminiscence. You don't understand. Is that so? Ah, Senior Brother, why are you crying? Is it because your wounds are hurting? Or are you worried that your cultivation won't recover? Didn't first Senior Brother say that? Your cultivation will definitely recover. Yu Zijian turned around and saw that Fu Qingjin was already covered in tears. She wiped his tears away in a flurry. She had never seen him so frail before. You don't understand. Fu Qingjin shook his head gently. Compared to his wounds and destroyed cultivation, there was an even deeper pain and despair that truly tore at his heart, chewing away all of his beautiful memories. He looked back at the broken sword beside him. He just felt like there were still some things that would not be reduced to ruins. It's fine. I just feel a little uncomfortable. Where are we? How far are we from the sword collection palace? Fu Qingjin asked. He had been in a daze the entire way. He had not even calculated his location, or the distance they had flown. We've only just arrived in the White Soil Prefecture. We're almost 1,000 kilometers away from the sword collection palace. The boat is stable, but it's far too slow. Senior brother, where do we stop? Yu Zijian was very confused. Fu Qingjin originally said he wanted to comprehend the Green Ruin's sword intent, but he had never stopped along the way. Then let's stop for a while, Fu Qingjin said. But it's just wasteland below. There's no ruins at all, Yu Zijian said. It's right under that tree. Fu Qingjin sat up and pointed at a withered tree in the wasteland. All right then. The boat drifted down. Fu Qingjin stood up with his sword. Yu Zijian wanted to support him, but he pushed her away. Dig a hole. Make it deeper. Fu Qingjin pointed at the bottom of the withered tree. Yeah. Yu Zijian drew the violet cloud sword. With a gentle twirl of violet light, she dug out a deep hole. There were countless severed roots in there, all of which had withered away. The soil of the White Soil Prefecture isn't white. Give me the sword. Fu Qingjin extended his hand, and Yu Zijian passed the violet cloud's sword to him. Fu Qingjin looked at the Green Ruins and violet cloud's swords in his hand. He had once believed that this was their fated bond, but as it turned out, it was also an illusion. As a result, he tossed the Green Ruin's sword and the violet cloud's sword into the deep hole. Senior brother? Yu Zijian widened her eyes. She was confused. Sever your connection with the violet cloud's sword and add the soil. Fu Qingjin closed his eyes. Arg. Yu Zijian basically doubted whether Fu Qingjin had lost his mind. To sword cultivators, they basically lived as long as the sword was present, and they would die if the sword was forgotten, let alone when they were two renowned swords. Don't ask too much. I'll tell you the reason in the future. Fu Qingjin's voice was extremely weak, but it was filled with determination. If it were not for the fact that the Green Ruin's sword had been cut in half, destroying the will of the legacy, if it were not for the heavy injuries from the myriad ghost banner, destroying the sword's intelligence, he might never have discovered this secret. Hey, alright then. Yu Zijian decided to go along with Fu Qingjin first, before secretly remembering this place. She could come back and dig it out in the future. Hua Sengzan knelt on one knee with his right hand. His long hair draped over his shoulders as he shook his head slowly. I don't know. Then do you know that you're actually harming him? The palace master's voice was cold and dignified. I don't know. Hua Sengzan shook his head again. I've treated you as a smart person and nurtured you so much, but I never thought you'd do something so foolish in the end. Palace master, you overestimate me. If I were really smart, why would I come to the sword collection palace? Hua Sengzan smiled bitterly. Ji Xuanri crouched down beside Hua Sengzan and lifted Hua Sengzan's chin. He continued to smile warmly, but his eyes were filled with pity. Junior brother Hua, with your talent and ability to comprehend, you should have been able to stand alongside us in just a few years, but I never thought you'd destroy your own future. By then would I still be me? Hua Sengzan countered with a question. To be continued. Chapter 1061. You're saying something stupid again. Humans are constantly changing. If they don't change, they're not human. You should have been my most capable helper. But it was just a mistake. Ji Xuanri's face was filled with regret. It's not just a mistake. People who walk different paths cannot work together. Hua Sengzan shook his head. Forget it. I know I can't convince you, but I don't plan on punishing you. After all, you're the senior brother I admire the most. However, you'll have to make up for the trouble you've caused. Don't forget that Li Qingshan basically died by your hands. He could have fought alongside us. Ji Xuanri stood up and said to the palace master and Ming Fei, I'll go visit father. First senior brother, everything might not go as you expect. Just as Ji Xuanri was about to step out of the hall, he heard Hua Sengzan's voice. He frowned slightly and glanced back. He smiled and stepped out of the hall. He had been taught to control everything since he was young. Even if there were some accidents, they were just small surprises in life. The palace master waved his hand and tapped between Wasungzan's eyebrows. Wasungzan shuddered. He felt like his last bit of consciousness was sinking into oblivion, being devoured by sword intent. He stared deeply at the palace master and stuttered. "Palace master, you want to use the sword to control people. But do you know if you are also being controlled by the sword? It's just becoming one with the sword. It doesn't matter who's controlling who." The palace master said indifferently and retracted his sword. Wasungzan collapsed on the ground motionless. Mingfei frowned. "I didn't think something like this would happen." The palace master said, "This kid isn't a sword cultivator, and he's extremely intelligent. It's nothing strange that he could fool our eyes. However, it was still a mistake. He only left a sliver of consciousness, or he could have secretly transmitted it to Li Qingshan." Mingfei said, "It's just a pity about the 3,000 sword forms. What we want is not just the 3,000 sword forms. Anyway, let's get rid of this problem first. It's very simple." Mingfei smiled coldly as a cold light flashed in her eyes. Wasungzan crawled to his feet slowly and shook his head firmly. He said apologetically, "Chungzan knows his mistake. It's good that you know your mistake." Dong, dong, dong. A melodious bell rang from outside the hall. The coronation ceremony was about to begin. Cultivators walked out of the side halls around the Hall of Great Strength in twos and threes. The Ming Queen and the Dark Queen basically discovered each other at the same time. When their eyes met, there was undisguised hostility. The master of the Sword Collection Palace and the master of the Umbral Een sect stood behind them as they stared at each other coldly. The Chan Monastery of Devanaga had purposefully separated the Umbral Een sect from the Sword Collection Palace to avoid any conflicts. However, it was inevitable that they would meet again. "Fellow Taoists, please come in. The celebration is about to begin." The unraging monk invited him with a smile. When he saw Wasungzan behind the Sword Collection Palace master, he felt rather puzzled. He had clearly not seen this person before. However, he did not take it to heart. On Great Buddha Mountain, neither side could afford to disrespect the Chan Monastery of Devanaga. The master of the Sword Collection Palace and the master of the Umbral Een sect both stepped into the hall. Very soon, all the invited cultivators arrived in the Hall of Great Strength. There were not a lot of people, only around a dozen or so. They all spoke softly, even directly communicating with their soul sense, which set off the emptiness and quietness of the majestic hall. As a result, the coronation ceremony was not particularly lively. Instead, it seemed extremely solemn and dignified. However, every single one of these people was a great cultivator that had undergone the third heavenly tribulation. Basically, all the powerful cultivators of the Green Province had gathered here. Even though they had purposefully concealed their auras, their presences still surged into the air when they gathered together. The 4 monk kings of the Chan Monastery of Devanaga received the guests in the center as hosts, while the 4 great cultivators of the Sword Collection Palace and the Umbral Een sect each occupied a corner of the hall, radiating with a cold, chilling aura. If others did not take the initiative to talk to them, they would never talk to anyone either. Unlike the Mist Province, none of the great cultivators from the sects of the Green Province left the 3 great sections. Aside from them, there were the great grandmasters of the Academy of Confucianism, Taoism, Dharma, and Moism. There were many of them, making them the most numerous. They discussed quietly. "I heard that the One-Wool Monk King isn't even 100 years old yet? How young? I've heard that she hasn't even reached 50 yet. That's unbelievable. Just how many years has it been since someone like that appeared in the world? She must be a reincarnated celestial too." "Oh right, didn't a reincarnated celestial appear in the Clear River Prefecture a few years ago? Don't mention it. He's already dead. Hee, there are good and bad among celestials too." Yu Weiyang stood with his arms crossed. His face was pale from anger, and he said nothing. Jean Fugui asked with a smile, "Old Yu, who are you angry at?" Yu Weiyang glanced at the Golden Hawk commander. You're still as meddlesome as ever. Jin Fugui laughed aloud. He was not angry at all. I'm just showing concern for an old friend. So how can you call that meddlesome? If you're always so hot-tempered, I'm afraid you won't live past 1,000 years old. If I can't, then I'll go to the Azura realm. If you can't, then you can go to hell. Alright. Let's hear it. If worst comes to worst, we'll work together and help you vent your anger. Do you know Li Qingshan? Yu Weiyang thought for a moment. Of course. He used to be my subordinate. Jin Fugui had a very deep impression of Li Qingshan. That kid has already played me twice. Yu Weiyang gritted his teeth. Li Qingshan had stood him up again. When Li Qingshan went to listen to the Zen Dharma conference, Yu Weiyang did not want to wait around Great Buddha Mountain. So he agreed to meet up with him at the Great General's estate after the Zen Dharma conference. He was ready to carry out the bait plan against the soaring Locust King. However, many days had passed since the Zen Dharma conference. Yu Weiyang had waited here and there, but Li Qingshan was nowhere to be seen. He was furious. The school of the military emphasized that military orders must be obeyed. If he's a disciple of the school of the military, I'll definitely kill him. Yu Weiyang ground his teeth. Of course, that was only if he could do it. Actually, Li Qingshan could not be blamed for not taking Great General Yu seriously. Now that Little An had a new, more perfect plan, he no longer wanted to be some stupid bait. Originally, he planned on telling Yu Weiyang after drawing the sword in the Sword Collection Palace. But with so many things happening along the way, he completely forgot about it. Jin Fugui laughed aloud when he heard that. He glanced at the unraging monk nearby. Why don't you just teach him a lesson while the unraging monk isn't by his side? Otherwise, I'll teach him a lesson for you. He's a member of my Hawkwolf Guard after all. Yu Weiyang said. You might not be able to teach him a lesson right now. Jin Fugui did not feel like there was anything wrong with teaching a junior a lesson. The unraging monk was not a petty person either. He's undergone the third heavenly tribulation a long time ago. Even the crown prince of Xiqing almost died at his hands when he came all the way from the Dragon Province. What right do you have to teach him a lesson? Yu Weiyang hesitated, but he still failed to hold back his anger. What did you say? Chapter 1062. Jin Fugui doubted his ears. His impression of Li Qingshan remained the same as several decades ago. It was also because of Xiqing that the unraging monk had hurried over from the Chan monastery of Devanaga all the way to save him. That brat is very fierce. It's already good enough that he doesn't teach us old fellows a lesson. How would I dare to teach him a lesson? Yu Weiyang couldn't help but sigh with emotion. What are the two uncles whispering about? Gu Yinying walked over. You said you're old, and that you should have worn my clothes a long time ago, Jin Fugui said with a smile. Forget it, I hate gold. As Gu Yinying spoke, she looked at Hua Sengzan. She felt that he had changed a lot. He was very different from the little blossom in her memory. Moreover, it was a little strange for him to appear here. Hua Sengzan sensed something and turned around to smile at her. Gu Yinying smiled back, but she felt strange and distant. She thought about it and didn't go over. Maybe it wasn't a bad thing for him. At this moment, Ji Xuanri suddenly made his way towards the master of the Umbraline sect and the Dark Queen. This bold action made the hall suddenly fall silent. All the gazes gathered over. Everyone knew about the hatred between the two sections. Although Ji Xuanri was the crown prince of Qing province, he carried a sword on his back. Xianri greets the Dark Queen and the sect master. It's been many years since we last met, but the sect master's bearing is still the same as before. Ji Xuanri continued to smile warmly, as if he was not facing a great enemy of the Sword Collection Palace, but two seniors of his. His Highness, the Crown Prince, seems to be getting better by the day. The sect master of the mysterious dark sect nodded slightly and squeezed out a smile, which made him look even more gloomy. Crown Prince, didn't we just meet not long ago? Didn't you want to kill me? The Dark Queen stroked the cat in her arms. He looked at Ji Xuanri with disgust. and his words caused the atmosphere in the entire hall of great strength to freeze. Chu Lai King was currently conversing with the dauntless monk. When he heard that, he could not help but frown. Ji Xuanri became even more humble. You've misunderstood, Dark Queen. I definitely have no such intentions. Get lost. I feel disgusted just by looking at your face. The Dark Queen simply closed her eyes. It was not just to humiliate Ji Xuanri. The face and the name both made her think of the person she had lost. Ji Xuanri's smile stiffened slightly. He had originally wanted to come over and show off the magnanimity of the future King Chu. However, he never expected the Dark Queen to actually ignore the situation at all. She was not even afraid of offending Chu Lai King. He thought, what a crazy woman. Slut, don't be so shameless. Ming Fei placed her hand on the hilt of her sword and shouted, Xian Ri, why bother with this slut? Hurry up and come over. The Dark Queen said, they really are mother and son after all. They're both disgusting. Amitabha. The dauntless monk called out the Buddhist name loudly, his voice shaking up the entire hall. He stepped forward to mediate. This is a tranquil land of Buddhism. Can the two princesses give this old monk some face and temporarily set aside their grievances? Live together peacefully for a period of time? Across the entire Green Province, and even the entire world, there were not a lot of people who would not give the dauntless monk face, but there just happened to be two of them here. And they were two furious women. Ming Fei did not seem to hear the dauntless monk at all. She sneered. Some sluts have lost their children. Seeing how we're united as mother and son, they'll obviously go mad with jealousy. The dauntless monk was helpless. If they don't give me face, then so be it. You dash. The Dark Queen widened her eyes and paled even more. This was the greatest pain she had ever experienced in her life. She said resentfully, I will definitely kill you. I will kill everyone in the Sword Collection Palace. The dauntless monk and the unraging monk looked at one another with bitter smiles. Originally, they wanted to discuss how to deal with the soaring Locust King after the ceremony. Now even the ceremony was about to be ruined. They could not help but blame this Crown Prince Xian Ri for not picking the right time. All of you shut up. Chu Lai King flew into a rage. A tremendous presence rushed into the air, and fierce winds whistled through the hall. With the King Chu's wrath, the Green Province shook up. Even great cultivators would be alarmed, but it was still useless. What? You're still going to protect this slut? She said she wanted to kill me. How laughable. A man who can't even protect his own child actually dares to order around. The Ming Fei and the Dark Queen actually targeted Chu Lai King together. Perhaps this was the only language they had in common. Chu Lai King's chest heaved, clearly angered to the limit, but he was unable to vent his anger. Just when the situation had spiraled out of control, a voice suddenly rang out. Father, please calm down. However, the voice did not come from Ji Xuanri. Instead, it came from behind the hall. It was a woman's voice, ethereal and captivating. In a daze, everyone caught a whiff of the faint fragrance of sandalwood. They saw a woman walk over from behind the hall. She wore a moon-white kasaya, untainted by even a speck of dust. Her long, dark hair reached the ground, and her beauty was like that of a goddess. Her footsteps were as gentle, as if she was levitating through the air. You are. Chu Lai King was slightly taken aback. In that moment he experienced a profound feeling. That was the connection of fate, the connection of blood and flesh. One will, what did you say? The dauntless monk raised an eyebrow. Father, did I hear it wrong? Fine. My ears seem to be particularly bad today. Jean Fugui communicated to Yu Wuyang beside him. I also doubt whether I heard it wrong or not. According to my knowledge, His Majesty the King Chu doesn't have a daughter like that. Don't tell me that. Yu Wuyang seemed to think of something, and exclaimed in surprise. The cultivators were surprised as well. They all discussed among themselves. She's one will. Sure enough, she's very young. But what's with father? Don't tell me he wants to recognize a foster father and mother after hearing about the Dark Queen's pain of losing her son? However, even the person who said that did not believe their own speculations. That was far too sudden. Buddhist disciples had always severed their ties with the secular world, and with her supreme talent, Why would she need to seek connections? Is it coming? Gu Yinying smiled. Yinying, what do you know? Jin Fugui asked. You'll understand if you keep watching, Gu Yinying said with interest. Chu Lai King stared at little Anne. Thousands of possibilities also appeared in his head, but they were all eliminated one by one. In the very beginning, only a single name remained, the name that was both the most likely and the most impossible. He still found it rather hard to believe. You're Xianyu? I've been called by that name before. Father still remembers it. Little Anne looked at Chu Lai King with a smile, overlapping with the figure in her memories. The Dark Queen held her breath the moment Little Anne walked out. Her eyes were locked onto her as her body trembled gently. A flush appeared on her pale face as she murmured, You're my Yuer. Little Anne bowed slightly towards Chu Lai King and arrived before the Dark Queen. She held her hands gently. Mother, I've returned. It was time to take back everything she had lost. Chapter 1063. Xianyue. The Dark Queen's tears had already fallen like rain. She let go of the cat in her arms and hugged Little Anne firmly. She used all of her strength, afraid that this was just a dream. Meow. Xianyue landed on the ground gently and turned around, crouching beside them. She raised her head and looked at the mother and daughter embracing each other. She felt both happy and disappointed. Sorry, mother. I've made you wait. Little Anne gently stroked her back. She also felt warmth in her heart. For a moment, she felt like she was seeing an illusion. Their identities had been reversed, and she was no longer a child. One will, are you really Princess Xianyue? The dauntless monk asked in disbelief. He felt like his brain was not enough. She used to be. Little Anne's voice was calm, possessing the power to calm people down, making it difficult for them to doubt her. I don't believe you. You're lying. Ming Fei said loudly. She felt a powerful threat. Ji Xuanri was originally the only successor to the position of King of Chu, yet a powerful competitor had suddenly appeared. This would change many things, perhaps even everything. Bitch, how dare you? The Dark Queen was furious. Mother. Little Anne patted the Dark Queen's hand and shook her head at her. Afterward, she said to Ming Fei, Is there something you need, Ming Fei? Xianyue is already dead. Ming Fei said firmly. Oh, how do you know? Little Anne asked. Everyone knows about this. Ming Fei said. Chu Lai King was slightly doubtful too. He had asked the school of Yin and Yang to perform many divinations, but they all said that Xuanyue's life force was already gone. How did she come back from the dead? Little Anne said. I did die once, but I was saved by someone. I came back to life again. Who saved you? I will definitely thank him greatly, the King of Chu asked. He's not a person of this world. He's already taken off and left. Little Anne raised her head slightly. Her gaze seemed to pass through the room and fly towards the distant horizon. Perhaps it was because she had heard him mention it too many times, but she also wanted to take a look beyond the 9 heavens. In the past, she did not care about these thoughts. You're lying, outsider. How is it possible to enter and leave this world freely? Ming Fei said. Yu Weiyang and Jin Fugui exchanged a glance. Those who were invited to the king-conferring ceremony were all existences who stood at the pinnacle of the 9 prefectures. They understood the power of the laws of heaven and earth the most. The 9 prefectures had long been devoured by the demon region. I don't know either, Little Anne said frankly. This was indeed illogical. Even for existences at the level of demon god Qiongqi, descending once required a great deal of effort and would cause a huge commotion. The only explanation was that the brother ox of Green Mountain was a being of a higher level than Qiongqi. This was not something that these people could understand. One will, you've been hiding so much from me. So this is where your true inheritance lies. The dauntless monk came to a realization and let out a long sigh. At first, he was worried that Little Anne had inherited the legacy of the Golden Cicada Spirit King. However, even the Golden Cicada Spirit King could not have made her go through 3 heavenly tribulations in a row in just a few decades. The ability to control 33 Buddhist treasures at the same time was not something that could exist in this world. Now that she had said so, everything made sense. That person didn't want me to reveal this. Don't tell me the person you're talking about is actually a bodhisattva? The dauntless monk's voice trembled slightly. He instinctively treated the person from beyond the heavens as a person of Buddhism. He felt like only bodhisattvas could freely traverse the various worlds, revive the dead, and grow flesh and bone, nurturing a prodigy of Buddhist cultivation like her. Little An said, he did mention the word bodhisattva. However, he was talking about the white-bone bodhisattva, and I never saw him reveal the appearance of a bodhisattva. Bodhisattvas redeem people through their myriad incarnations, so it makes sense that they don't want to reveal their true appearance. The dauntless monk was ravishing with joy. He felt a sense of deep veneration towards Little An, who had seen a bodhisattva before. If all of this was real, then she was the chosen one. She was the hope of the Chan monastery of Devanaga, no, of all Buddhism in the world. He was also willing to believe that this was real. Compared to that, a measly position of monk king was nothing. A series of clangs rang out from behind the grand hall. The 7 treasures monk king gripped his staff firmly and was unable to hold back his excitement. His golden bracelet trembled. He had come with a decree to confer the title of monk king to Little An, and he planned on persuading Little An again. However, when Little An went out to reunite with her family, she had asked him to wait here. He never thought he would actually hear such a startling secret. Having been defeated by Little An's 33 Buddhist treasures, he basically believed her more than anyone else. He repeated inside, so that's how it is. So that's how it is. I have to report this to the imperial preceptor. He has to get her to come to the Spirit Kingdom Temple. He has to get her to come to the Spirit Kingdom Temple. Amitabha. The Buddha is merciful. The 4 guardian deities brought their palms together and chanted the name of Buddha, bowing towards Little An. They were not bowing to her, but to the faintly discernible bodhisattva behind her. Immediately, the grand hall was enveloped in a mysterious, solemn, and religious atmosphere. The cultivators looked at one another. Those who were not Buddhists struggled to understand this feeling. If Little An really was the successor of a bodhisattva, then she was basically like a savior to the Buddhist disciples of this world. The bodhisattva must have enlightened Little An so that she could illuminate this world. So that's how it is. That's the only explanation for their cultivation speed and their unbelievable power. Though, that probably isn't some bodhisattva, Gu Yinying thought. She had seen Li Qingshan's demon form and Little An's skeletal form. She found it very difficult to believe that they were the handiwork of a bodhisattva. Under this atmosphere, Ming Fei was unable to harp on this topic anymore. She questioned, "All right, even if what you said is true, why did you only reveal yourself now? I remember that you were already a disciple of the Chan monastery of Devanaga many years ago. I was harmed by someone. My soul was damaged, and my memories were damaged. In the beginning, I couldn't even speak. Even though there were some fragments of my memories, I couldn't confirm it. Only afterwards did I completely recover my memories. I've made you wait, Mother," Little An apologized. "Who harmed you? Was it this woman?" The Dark Queen pointed at Ming Fei and asked. Little An gazed deeply at Ming Fei. Her empty eyes actually made Ming Fei feel a sliver of fear. That was not the gaze of looking at a person, but more like gazing at emptiness. Chu Lai King frowned. If Xian Yu really did accuse Ming Fei of being the murderer, then the problem would be severe. Little An shook her head gently. "I'm not too sure either. After all, I was still young back then. But that's not important. What's important is that I'm back, isn't it?" "Yeah, you're right." Although the Dark Queen struggled to quell her resentment, she did not want to pursue the matter right now and ruin the joy of their reunion. "No matter who the murderer is, I will make them pay the price." Chu Lai King let out a sigh of relief. Basically, he had acknowledged Little An's identity indirectly. Even without the profound connection of his closest kin, he did not believe there was a need for her to pretend to be his daughter. "Thank you, Father." Little An bowed and turned around. She said to the head of the Sword Collection Palace, "Palace Master, you can take out the Xieji's horn now, right? Did I lie at all?" Chapter 1064. Immediately, everyone's gazes gathered on the master of the sword collection palace. His face sank slightly, and he extended his right hand from behind his back. He held a curved horn. From the moment Little An appeared, the master of the sword collection palace had silently taken out the Xieji's horn. He never expected her to discover it. This was no longer due to her powerful cultivation, but also due to her sharp judgment. He could vaguely sense that this would be an unexpectedly powerful enemy. Most of the great cultivators present knew about the wondrous effects of the Xieji's horn, which further proved the truth of what Little An had said. Their initial sliver of doubt had all been dispelled now. Sure enough, the new generation replaces the old. Now she's a true prodigy. Jean Fugué sighed. Princess Xianyue, the One-Will Monk King, and the unbelievable successor of the Bodhisattva combined made Ji Xuanri, the crown prince of the Green Province, pale in comparison. He could already foresee that her existence would definitely influence the overall situation of the world. Amipa, congratulations to Your Majesty the King of Chu. Congratulations to the Dark Queen. The family has been reunited, and the pearl has been recovered. The dauntless monk smiled. In the past few years, my daughter has been so cute and taking care of me. I'm extremely grateful. I almost forgot to congratulate the Chan Monastery of Devanaga for gaining another monk king. The fierce king of Chu also smiled delightedly. This had been a knot in his heart as well. Then congratulations to you too. The dauntless monk and Chu Lai King exchanged glances and smiled. The relationship between the Chan Monastery of Devanaga and the king of Chu's estate was basically a win-win situation. This was good for both of them. The cultivators all congratulated Chu Lai King and the dauntless monk before congratulating Little An. Ming Fei's expression constantly changed. The master of the sword collection palace closed his eyes, as if he was thinking about something. Little An said nothing, only nodding with a smile, but no one would find him rude. Everything had developed according to his expectations. She had not let him down after all. From now onwards, her will could represent the Chan Monastery of Devanaga, and even influence the entire cultivation community of the Green Province. Whether it was killing the soaring Locust King, or assisting the Golden Cicada Spirit King in ascending, she could do it with ease. The only pity was, he was not here. Sister Xianyu, welcome back. It's great that you're still alive. This way, all the misunderstandings can be resolved. Ji Xuanri walked forward. His face was filled with a warm smile. If someone who didn't know what was going on saw it, did he really think that it was because of sibling love? Little An was about to answer when his heart suddenly skipped a beat. He turned to look outside the Hall of Great Strength. Ji Xuanri was no longer in his eyes. Didn't I warn you? Piss off. Don't disgust us. The Dark Queen's voice was filled with delight. Damn bitch, Ji Xuanri thought. A sliver of anger flashed through his eyes, not just because of what the Dark Queen had said, but because her appearance had disrupted his entire plan. Little An didn't do it to humiliate Ji Xuanri, but he sensed a familiar aura approaching. He's finally here. So slow. You didn't even see my performance. He seems very angry. What happened? A beam of light whizzed over from the northern horizon, heading straight for the peak of Great Buddha Mountain. With a boom, it struck outside the Hall of Great Strength like a rock. Li Qingshan stood in the rising dust and bellowed, Ji Xuanri, get your ass out here. His voice rumbled like thunder, echoing across Great Buddha Mountain. Who is it? The cultivators in the Hall of Great Strength were all surprised. Who was Ji Xuanri? He was the crown prince of the Green Province, the future King Chu. Only the Dark Queen was bold enough to humiliate him to his face. Who else was bold enough to tell him to piss off? However, Ji Xuanri began laughing. He communicated with Ming Fei. Mother, our esteemed elder has arrived. Finally, a portion of the plan was back on track. Ming Fei sneered too. Originally, she thought she would have to do something else to infuriate him. But in the end, he was even more brainless than she imagined. Li Qingshan, oh Li Qingshan, Great Buddha Mountain is where you die. The people who kill you will be your fellow disciples. Li Qingshan stepped into the Hall of Great Strength. The golden tiles beneath his feet shattered, and his black hair drifted backwards. He raised his thick eyebrows and pursed his lips. He was furious. Even though he did not give off any aura, he possessed his own intimidating bearing. All the cultivators felt a fishy wind blowing against their faces. It was as if a ferocious tiger had barged into the crowd and was looking for prey. When they met his gaze, they felt a sense of wariness. He really is vicious and powerful. I finally believe he can kill, is bold enough to kill the crown prince of Xiqing. Jean Fugue was stunned at first before sighing in amazement at Yu Wuyang. This kid is getting bolder and bolder. I'd like to see how he deals with this today. However, Yu Wuyang was rather worried. Although he had been stood up twice, they were still fellow cultivators. He did not want Han Qiongji to be sad either. Li Qingshan glanced around and saw Hua Sengzan in the corner. Seeing how he was fine, as if he was unharmed, he eased up slightly and strode over. There was a flash before him, and Ji Xuanri blocked his way again. He asked with a smile, "Qingshan, what business do you have with me?" Li Qingshan was no longer swayed by his words. He spat out 2 words, "Piss off." Ji Xuanri shrugged and backed to one side. Ming Fei barked, "How dare you? How dare you offend the crown prince? What do you think your punishment is?" She turned around and said to the dauntless monk, "Dauntless abbot, is this how the Chan monastery of Devanaga teaches their disciples?" "Qingshan, what's wrong? What happened?" The unraging monk grabbed Li Qingshan's shoulder and asked frantically, "Master, this is a matter between me and the Sword Collection Palace. There's no need for you to interfere." Li Qingshan gently pushed the unraging monk away and took a step forward. He said to the master of the Sword Collection Palace, "Hand him to me, and we'll mind our own business or else." The master of the Sword Collection Palace interrupted him. "Or else what? Chengzan is a disciple of our Sword Collection Palace. How can we allow you to act so recklessly? Little Hua, don't be afraid. With me here today, I'll slaughter anyone who touches a hair on you." Li Qingshan surged with murderousness. "Li Qingshan, take a good look at this place," the dauntless monk said furiously. "Qingshan, this is a peaceful place of Buddhism. No one will be injured here, so you might as well explain everything." Little and walked over and grabbed Li Qingshan's hand, expressing that he was not completely helpless. Li Qingshan made up his mind and considered it slightly. His priority right now was still to ensure Hua Sengzan's safety. Hua Sengzan was willing to take great risks for his friend, so he could not let him be harmed no matter what. However, before he could say anything, Hua Sengzan spoke first. "Qingshan, we've been friends for nothing. Do you really have to kill me?" "Little Hua, what did you say?" Li Qingshan was alarmed. The Hua Sengzan before him had become extremely unfamiliar. "Forget it. If that's the case, I'll announce your scheme to the world and let them judge you. Not only has this person become a demon king, but he's even colluding with the demon domain in an attempt to topple the Green Province. The soaring locust king was only able to escape because of his assistance. So please kill him together, fellow cultivators." Chapter 1065. Green smoke curled up into the air, and the lofty Buddha statue stood high above. Its eyes were slightly shut, completely unfazed. The murals depicted arhats and goddesses, as well as the living beings of the 8 tribes, all in different expressions. They were lifelike, overlooking everything in the hall. "Please punish him together." The 4 words echoed through the hall like a bolt of lightning, landing in everyone's hearts. They all looked at Li Qingshan. Demon King, releasing the soaring locust king, colluding with the demon domain. As long as any single one of these accusations were true, it would be enough to kill him right here and now. Li Qingshan stood proudly unfazed. His heart sank. He was not worried about these slander and accusations. He was worried about Hua Sengzan. Even when his life was threatened, he believed that Hua Sengzan would never say something like that unless his mind was under control. Is this the secret of the sword? The Sword Collection Palace? Little and wanted to speak up for him, but he saw Li Qingshan's face sink. He said nothing. He did not want to argue with his friend. Now that the situation had developed to this point, there was nothing he could do about it. He had not spent all these years of arduous cultivation to bicker with others. As a result, Little and let go of his hand and silently retreated to one side. Ji Xuanri smiled. Sister Xianyue, with your current identity and status, you should draw a clear line between you and people like that. Little and smiled at him. She was devastatingly beautiful. Ji Xuanri was stunned. He was speechless. Fellow Hua, you said my disciple colluded with the demon domain and released the soaring locust king. Do you have any proof? The unraging monk asked. Unraging monk, it's already come to this, yet you still want to protect him? If you don't believe me, then please ask him to release his aura. Let's see whether it's demon chi or not. Hua Sengzan was aggressive. His face was filled with regret and helplessness. He had used his intelligence and wisdom to put Li Qingshan to death. The unraging monk frowned. This was indeed the greatest flaw. Li Qingshan's cultivation was without a doubt that he was a demon king. The various twists and turns in this matter were difficult to explain to others. Once it was exposed, it was inevitable that people would believe him slightly if he colluded with the demon domain, which would be a huge scandal for the monastery. Gu Yinying frowned slightly. There was something wrong with Xiao Hua's behavior. Chu Liking said, Li Qingshan, release your aura. As for whether or not you colluded with the infernal domain, you can use the Xieji's horn to verify it. This king will prove your innocence. There's no need. I'm not innocent, and I don't need any innocence. Li Qingshan refused indifferently. He was already tired of following the plot set up by others. Wasn't it enough to be played to this extent? So what if he could prove he was not colluding with the infernal domain in the end? Would he be able to save Hua Sengzan? Perhaps he had already lost this friend forever. You. Chu Liking raised an eyebrow. He never expected him to refuse so straightforwardly. In other words, you admit you're a demon king, colluding with the demon domain and releasing the soaring locust king? Ming Fei communicated with him at the same time. Kid, how does it feel to be betrayed? You brought this upon yourselves. Originally, all you had to do was refine the soul-switching sword obediently. Li Qingshan did not answer. He remained silent like a rock. Hua Sengzan continued. And I even know a great secret about this person. He has another identity. Li Qingshan raised his hand and pointed directly at Hua Sengzan. Right when everyone thought he would retort angrily and threaten him, he said seriously, this person is my friend. I want to take him away. Those who stand in my way will die. Hua Sengzan shuddered inside. He met Li Qingshan's eyes, only to see that there was no hatred or blame in his black eyes, only apologetic and concerned. Li Qingshan, you won't be taking anyone away today. Ming Fei glanced backwards. Chengzan, what other identity does he have? Tell us. She was rather curious as well. Just what other secrets did Li Qingshan have yet to expose? The sight of friends killing each other sure was touching. Qingshan. Hua Sengzan's voice was hoarse. His expression twisted as he struggled. His handsome face immediately became rather vicious. His body slowly bent, and he knelt on the ground. A sliver of determination flashed through his eyes as he gritted his teeth. A strand of blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth, dripping onto the golden brick. Everyone was stunned. The dauntless monk was alarmed. Seeing blood in the grand hall was extremely ominous. Chengzan. Li Qingshan's eyes immediately reddened. He wanted to go over, but Ming Fei blocked his way again. Li Qingshan, stop putting on an act. If you want to silence me, you'll have to get through me first. Then she communicated secretly. You sure can put up with it. Though looks like I really can't spare him. Li Qingshan, I can give you another chance. If you kneel and admit your guilt right now, I can still spare his life. Otherwise. Li Qingshan took a step forward, and thousands of golden bricks shattered. The grand hall shook. He swung his fist. Qingshan, you mustn't. The unraging monk stopped him loudly. Everyone else was surprised. He's actually bold enough to attack. A hint of a smile flashed through Ming Fei's eyes. Had he finally run out of patience? Right from the beginning, she had never thought about proving that Li Qingshan was colluding with the demon domain. All she needed to do was infuriate him. He had used the methods of a demon king to attack her, the princess, in front of everyone. Just this crime alone was punishable by death. With a clang, the sword left its sheath. The blade trembled and turned into nothingness, but it produced a strange hum. The space there rippled, overlapping with one another. The Sword of Clear Void, one of the 10 famed swords of the Sword Collection Palace. It possessed an extremely wondrous power. It could form a world of its own for defense, while it could split space for offense. In that moment, Ming Fei seemed to leave the Grand Hall and stand in a different world. She sneered at Li Qingshan's incoming fist and communicated secretly. When I faced that bitch the Dark Queen that day, I was only intentionally hiding my strength. Do you really think you can harm me? Ming Fei suddenly discovered that Li Qingshan's eyes had turned red. It was not a bloodshot red, but a clear scarlet red. His long hair fluttered like fire, and his face became extremely unfamiliar. A pair of curved ox horns grew on his head, engraved with the 2 words North Moon. In an instant, a demonic aura soared into the sky, causing everyone's expression to change. Even the majestic golden Buddha statue dimmed. The nightmare tiger's demonic eye. Ming Fei's breathing halted. She became dazed, and she could not help but feel a hint of fear. Strength of the earth. Ming Fei widened her eyes. The incoming fist rapidly expanded, filling her entire field of vision like a mountain. Tremors of the ox demon. Black cracks crisscrossed and the overlapping space shattered. The Sword of Clear Void materialized before shattering loudly. Fury of the tiger demon. Li Qingshan let out a furious roar, and his fist landed heavily on Ming Fei's face. How could this be? Ming Fei's face was filled with disbelief. Then her beautiful face shattered like the clear sky sword. The vibrating power spread through her entire body, turning her into a bloody mist. Thousands of blood droplets swept past everyone's eyes, splashing onto the Buddha murals, and dyeing the Hall of Great Strength red. Chapter 1066. Li Qingshan's furious roar shook up the Grand Hall, echoing through the entire Great Buddha Mountain. A small, white sword flew out from the thousands of droplets of blood. It was also sent flying by the punch, spinning as it stabbed into the lotus pedestal beneath the Buddha statue. The small sword was semi-transparent, and the figure of a woman who resembled Ming Fei could be vaguely seen. It was Ming Fei's sword infant. Li Qingshan pulled back his fist, but he did not take another glance at it. Who are you? Ming Fei was terrified. She recalled Hua Sengzan's unspoken secret. Crack. A black crack appeared on the sword infant. The sword infant trembled a few times, but it was unable to stop the crack from spreading. It enveloped the entire sword before shattering loudly. Dazzling light shot out from every single door and window. A circular wave of air erupted from the top of Great Buddha Mountain, sweeping over 1,000 kilometers away. The light was like the sea as sword chi surged. All the great cultivators unleashed their defenses, blocking the terrifying power of the sword infant shattering. Buddhist chants suddenly rang out. The Grand Hall was enveloped in golden light. The protective formation had already been activated. The shockwave dispersed. The sword shattered, the person died, and the infant shattered. Those who stand in my way shall die. I will keep my word. The bell at the back of the hall continued to ring. The same bell seemed to appear in the heads of all the great cultivators. They were filled with disbelief, basically doubting everything before them to be a dream. A renowned great sword cultivator had been killed by a single punch just like that. Jean Fugui widened his eyes and opened his mouth slightly, completely unaware of what had just happened. Only now did he realize how laughable and dangerous it was for him to say that he wanted to teach Li Qingshan a lesson. Yu Weiyang was stunned as well. Even though he already knew that Li Qingshan was hiding a lot of strength, he never expected him to be such a colossal figure. Suddenly, he recalled what the Azura King had said to him after the battle in the Azura field. For some reason, I just feel like I'll be in danger of being killed too if I were to fight this kid. How strange. The Dark Queen was stunned too. She was filled with resentment towards Ming Fei. But everything had happened far too quickly. Before she could even feel the joy of revenge, She was instead filled with disbelief. Gu Yinying smiled faintly and sighed with emotion. Had the wild youth under the pine tree finally reached this step? Qing province spanned 30,000 miles, and Jianghu was only a corner. This was what she had told him back then. And to him now, Qing province was only a corner. The dauntless monk shut his eyes painfully. Was it another golden cicada spirit king? No. It was a fiendish demon that was even more terrifying than the golden cicada spirit king. Even the current golden cicada spirit king would not dare to brazenly attack and kill Ming Fei in front of so many mighty cultivators in the Hall of Great Strength. I am North Moon, Li Qingshan said proudly. Hua Sengzan would rather bite his tongue off than reveal the secret. Let him announce it to the world. He felt great delight inside. From this moment onwards, there was no need for him to hide carefully anymore. There was no need for him to be secretive anymore. Li Qingshan was the North Moon, and the North Moon was Li Qingshan. If there really was a path to the 9 heavens, then he would use this place as the starting point. North Moon Demon King. These 4 words appeared in the heads of all the great cultivators. As it turned out, the North Moon that the Dragon King of the Sea had been pursuing for thousands of kilometers had been hiding his identity the entire time. As it turned out, he was not dead. The blood that had splattered across the ground was scarlet and dazzling, making them shiver. Many of them were no stronger than Ming Fei. Standing in the Hall of Great Strength was like sharing a room with a vicious tiger as mortals. They experienced this long-awaited feeling of terror once again. It was the threat of death. Qingshan, you no wonder. No wonder. The unraging monk gazed at the scarlet-haired, scarlet-eyed figure. His smile was suddenly filled with bitterness. With this, all of Li Qingshan's illogicality could be explained, but it was the explanation he did not want the most. Master, I hope you don't regret accepting me as your disciple. Whether I'm a demon king or a demon king, I'm still me. Li Qingshan pressed his chest and said sincerely, "What's the point of saying this now?" The unraging monk let out a long sigh. "Oh, my damned disciple. Even if I'm willing to believe you, what about the others? Perhaps you don't need anyone else to believe you anymore." Li Qingshan. Chu Lai King flew into a rage. He slammed his palm towards Li Qingshan as hard as he could. In that moment, the scenery and the surroundings twisted and collapsed. The great cultivators were only affected by the residual force, but they all felt like they could not stand steadily anymore. Li Qingshan only felt like the world had turned upside down and twisted. The Buddhist murals in the surroundings all became grotesque and bizarre, seeming to be mocking, seeming to be sorrowful, seeming to be mocking. He thought, he really is the Lord of the Green Province after all. The power in his palm strike is definitely no weaker than the Dragon King of the Seas. However, that's all there is to it. His eyes flashed. When he saw through the grotesque and bizarre murals, he struck out with his palm. Bang! The 2 palms collided, and the distorted world returned to normal. Chu Lai King was shocked and furious. He stared at Li Qingshan in disbelief. The power of his palm strike could even collapse a mountain, yet Li Qingshan did not budge at all. He was like a mountain forged from steel, unshakable. Instead, an unstoppable force appeared, accompanied by a strange power of tremors. Li Qingshan had never lost to anyone when it came to a contest of strength. Even if the Dragon King of the Sea was present, it would be the same. Your Majesty the King of Chu, you are so noisy and your mouth is a mess. I don't know how you endure it, but I can't. Li Qingshan shrugged his shoulders. I'm sorry, little Anne. I ruined your plan. He then smiled and said to Ji Xuanri, and yours. Die. Ji Xuanri roared, and pulled out the soul-extinguishing sword. He was about to take revenge for Ming Fei, but just as he took a step forward, a white sword tip pierced through his chest. The 3 protective treasures on his body did not have any effect. He did not even have the slightest warning. He turned his head and said while gritting his teeth, Ji Xianyu, it's okay, as long as you're happy, Little Anne said. Her sneak attack was even more fatal than Li Qingshan's attack. I'm afraid you'll be unhappy. This guy is your brother, right? Li Qingshan said. He's all right. I've hated him since I was young. I can't wait for him to die. Little An pulled out the Buddha-slaying sword. Ji Xuanri collapsed on the ground. He sensed the aura of death permeate the air. His widened eyes were filled with confusion and terror. What's going on? I've only been struck once. I don't want to die. The samadhi flames of white bone erupted from his wound and swallowed him instantly. In the moment before his death, he suddenly understood what Hua Sengzan had said. Everything might not be as you expect. Xuanri. Chu Lai King was utterly furious. This was the successor he had placed all of his hopes on. When will? The expressions of the four monk kings all changed drastically. The shock inside was even greater than when Li Qingshan killed Ming Fei. This sinister, strange method did not seem like a Buddhist cultivation method no matter how they looked at it. Instead, it was filled with blasphemy, even more so than demon folk. Chapter 1067. Behind Xiao An's alluring beauty, white bones and skeletons could be vaguely seen. From the moment Li Qingshan transformed into North Moon and killed Ming Fei, there was no room for negotiation anymore. It was impossible for the Chan monastery of Devanaga to just stand by. So let's face it together. Whether it's fortune or misfortune, I'll bear half of it for you. Father, please leave. Little An drifted over and swung down with her sword. After witnessing the terrifying power of the Buddha-slaying sword, Chu Lai King was afraid of being struck by the blade. All he could do was pull back and retreat. He said in anguish, Xianyue, I'm your father. Little An said apologetically, Father, there's nothing I can do to repay you for raising me up. However, as long as my path exists, I can only stubbornly persist. Killing your brother and your father is your repayment, your path? Chu Lai King questioned. In the blink of an eye, great joy had turned into great sorrow. Even with Chu Lai King's willpower, he found it rather difficult to endure. Little An closed her eyes. There was nothing she could say. Possessing a human heart and taking back everything from the past meant enduring various restraints and even pain. But she also needed to make a choice. Originally, Li Qingshan could not be bothered to waste his breath, but he could not help but argue for her right now. So what if I killed my brother? That kid Ji Xuanri is putting on an act, but he's full of evil tricks. He's even worse than his mother. Killing him is the right thing to do. Otherwise, when he becomes King Chu in the future, he'll definitely bring disaster to the Green Province. As his father, you're also responsible. We've helped you out greatly, you know? As for killing your father, don't you slander us. We haven't killed you yet. So of course, we don't plan on killing you either. Am I right, Little An? Little An had no idea whether to laugh or cry. That was not without reason. But since when did someone kill someone else's wife and child, and claim that they were helping them? That last sentence was as mocking as it could get. Chu Lai King basically lost his mind from anger. His hatred surged. Everything had to be attributed to this wretched demon. I don't care if you're Li Qingshan or North Moon, human or demon. Don't even think about leaving Great Buddha Mountain alive today. Everyone, what are you waiting for? Chu Lai King gave an order, and his words were the law. Li Qingshan, I originally thought you had a Buddhist nature and wisdom, which is why I allowed you to cultivate in the monastery. You've actually made a terrible mistake. Not only did you conceal your identity as a demon, but you've even committed a massacre in the temple. But you also for Taoism, Yu Li and Li Li Yu Shan and... The dauntless monk swung his hand and powered the protective formation, enveloping the grand hall in golden light, and sealing off all the doors, turning it into a golden cage. He glanced at Xiao An and sighed again. The dauntless monk's hopes for her were so great that they even surpassed the unraging monk's hopes for Li Qingshan. But in the end, it was all for naught, which left him extremely disappointed. Cut the bullshit. Right and wrong will naturally be clear. Li Qingshan waved his hand, and the wildflower blade appeared in his hand. Sensing his raging battle intent, the wildflower blade's spirit roared out excitedly. Kid, are you finally going to start a massacre? Do you think there's still a future for you? Fearless guardian king. The dauntless monk bellowed out furiously. His Buddhist light shone brightly, turning into a fearless guardian king. At the same time, Two other guardian kings rose up from the ground, falling into the guardian king demon subduing formation. But they left behind a huge gap. Unraging. The three guardian kings looked at the unraging monk together. The unraging monk closed his eyes before suddenly snapping them open again. With a flash of light, he turned into the unraging guardian king and filled in the gap. The four guardian kings fell into a formation together and bellowed out at the same time. Guardian king demon subduing. Their voices rumbled like thunder. The golden light condensed into a huge golden mountain, crushing down on Li Qingshan. It suddenly came to a halt a meter away from his head. That's not necessarily true. Li Qingshan supported the golden mountain with a single hand. The strength of the earth flowed out endlessly from beneath his feet. But the golden mountain was even heavier than regular mountains. The four guardian kings worked together and pressed down inch by inch. With a thought, Li Qingshan used the gravity of the earth. The golden mountain immediately became weightless, and the four guardian kings lost their footing. Go! Li Qingshan raised his hands and pushed as hard as he could, sending the golden mountain flying towards the majestic Buddha statue in the hall. The Buddha statue suddenly opened its eyes and stared at Li Qingshan. It extended its hand and grabbed the golden mountain. The mountain that was as heavy as a mountain seemed to be weightless in the Buddha's hand. The Buddha stood up slowly, becoming even taller than the four guardian kings. It had gathered millions of worshippers and the condensed power of belief over 10,000 years. The Buddha strode towards Li Qingshan with heavy footsteps. At the same time, the arhats, maidens, and protector Jialan on the murals in the surroundings all appeared. Many of them gave off the aura of the third heavenly tribulation. Li Qingshan vaguely recalled that this was also the handiwork of the five absolutes immortal. In that moment, the Grand Hall seemed to become a Buddhist kingdom on earth, rippling with boundless golden light. In order to clean up their sect, the Chan monastery of Devanaga had already done everything they could. Jin Fugui and Yu Wuyang exchanged glances and drew their arcane treasures and weapons. They were also honored guests of the King Chu's estate. No matter how they viewed Li Qingshan, they could only treat him as an enemy right now. The other great cultivators of the academy all stepped forward and unleashed their supreme techniques. A great grandmaster of Moism unleashed a few puppet kings, while the great grandmasters of the famed school prepared the mantra of many words. Wretched demon, today is the day you die. When you killed the disciples of my school of Confucianism, did you think this day would come? An old man with a long beard barked. He wore a set of yellow scholarly robes, clearly a great grandmaster of Confucianism. Haha, you need to be careful. We don't know each other well. When we fight later, I won't show any mercy. I'll probably end up killing another disciple of Confucianism. Li Qingshan smiled. You're already at death's door, yet you're still so stubborn. Even in the chaotic Mist province, the king of Southern Yu could command a group of demonic cultivators, let alone the strict order of the Green Province here. It had reigned for an even longer period of time than the Great Xia Empire, which allowed the King Chu's estate to possess supreme authority. With a single order from the Chu Lai king, all cultivators had to obey. However, this was all within the Chan monastery of Devanaga. Otherwise, everyone would have to consider just how great of a price they were willing to pay. What a grand spectacle, Li Qingshan said. This spectacle really did live up to the name of the blooming blade at the end of the road. It seemed a little like he was at the end of the road, but before he saved Wasengzan, he would never back down. However, the master of the sword collection palace remained in a corner of the hall the entire time, guarding beside Wasengzan. Even when Ming Fei and Ji Xuanri were killed, he did not move at all, giving Li Qingshan no opportunity at all. Aren't you going to avenge those two bastards? Li Qingshan asked. You're dead for sure, so why do you need me? You're looking for an opportunity to save this traitor, aren't you? The master of the sword collection palace was filled with hatred. If it were not for Wasengzan's warning, and he allowed Li Qingshan to refine the soul-switching sword, the situation would not have developed like this. The sword collection palace would not have lost two great sword cultivators for some reason. causing his entire plan to fail. If you touch a single hair on him, I'll make your entire family die, Li Qingshan said. Chapter 1068. He swung the sword with heavenly reliance, revealing his abilities. There were no complicated moves, only determination to cut through everything. At this moment of life and death, Hua Sengzan's eyes recovered their clarity. His mind was unprecedentedly clear. The light from the sword filled his vision, but the figure in white remained in his mind. He smiled. He still could not forget her after all. You're looking to die. Li Qingshan's eyes almost popped out of his head. He spread his fingers and reached out, using the gravity of the earth. Hua Sengzan immediately rose into the air, flying towards Li Qingshan. However, he was not as fast as heavenly reliance. Just when he was about to be cleaved in half, he extended a jade folding fan and blocked heavenly reliance. The atmospheric winds and the light clashed violently, kicking up violent gusts of wind that rumbled through the hall. Gu Yinying arrived with the wind, arriving first despite having set out later. Her white clothes drifted about. Commander Gu. Hua Sengzan widened his eyes and stared at her deeply. Gu Yinying, do you want to help this wretched demon as well? Don't forget who you are. The palace master glared at Gu Yinying, and his gaze condensed into an invisible sword intent. This person has publicly exposed the wretched demon's evil deeds. You should be rewarding him. Why must you kill him? Gu Yinying's eyes turned into a hawk's eyes, as if they could see through everything. She nullified the invisible sword intent, which made her seem even more valiant. He's a member of my sword collection palace now. I have my own ways of dealing with him. Do you really think you can stop me? The palace master slapped the hilt of his sword, and heavenly reliance turned into a streak of light as it shot off. Sword manipulation had always been the foundation of cultivators of the sword. After it left his hand, heavenly reliance was like a serpent that had plunged into the ocean. It was even faster than when it was in his hand, slashing towards Hua Sengzan viciously. Scorching wind hell. However, Gu Yinying seemed to have been expecting this. Before the flying sword had even shot out, she had already unfurled her jade folding fan. With a gentle wave, rolling hot winds whistled and swallowed Hua Sengzan, sucking him into the scorching wind hell. Self-created domain. The heavenly sword missed and flew back into the palace master's hand. He pointed the tip at Gu Yinying. Gu Yinying, I'd like to see how long you can last. If you don't hand over Hua Sengzan, don't even think about leaving. Hua Sengzan knew far too many secrets of the sword collection palace. He had to die. Very long. Gu Yinying smiled. Thank you, Commander Gu. Li Qingshan said. You're welcome. This is my friendship with Little Flower. It has nothing to do with you, but you better do something. Gu Yinying waved her hand without even turning her head. She waved her jade folding fan, stirring up a hot wind to melt the whistling sword chi. A self-created domain, and the manifestation of hell. Such a move was indeed powerful, but it also required a great deal of effort. It was impossible to maintain it for a long time, not to mention the fact that he had to block the attack of a great sword cultivator. All right, Li Qingshan no longer had any worries. He looked around at the hostile faces around him, and the boundless Buddhist kingdom that glowed with golden light. Pride immediately filled his chest, and he raised his blade. I'd like to see what you're capable of. If you end up dying under my blade, don't even think about regretting it in the afterlife. Come. Wretched demon, don't you dare speak so arrogantly. The first to strike was a pale-faced, slightly plump, middle-aged man in the distance. He was the Grandmaster from the famed sect. He formed a seal with his hands and called out. Freeze! The simple word contained endless power. It was infused with his entire life's worth of cultivation, and it was the famed incantation of the famed sect, the freeze incantation. The Grandmaster smiled calmly. I've already frozen this demon. Please kill him, Grandmasters. He was rather disapproving inside. You really don't know your place. Even if you have the supreme strength to kill Ming Fei with a single punch, Even a demon king will die here with so many of us working together. Do you think you'll be able to overturn the situation? Li Qingshan shuddered. He was immediately immobilized. I'll lend you a hand, fellow. In a battle of life and death, even a split second of hesitation could determine life and death. Guardian King Demon subduing. The dauntless monk bellowed out, and the 4 Guardian Kings struck together. Under the effects of the Guardian King Demon subduing formation, the 4 powers combined into a single strike, turning into a colossal Vajra that smashed down. Break! Li Qingshan bellowed out. It was the Tiger Demon's fierce roar, breaking free from the freeze incantation in a single stroke, and blocking the falling Vajra with his blade. Boom! The ground cracked and collapsed, and the great hall shook. The Grandmaster paled, and could not help but take a step back. He never thought his freeze incantation would actually be broken so quickly, and the tiger's roar seemed to ring out right beside his ear, making him dizzy and suffering from a backlash. Before the tiger's roar had even subsided, the dragon's roar rang out again. At first, it was as thin as a thread, but in the blink of an eye, it blanketed the surroundings like a soaring dragon, directly pouring into his head. His blood surged, and he took another step back. The chant of Devanaga. The dauntless monk was alarmed. All he saw was Little and open her mouth slightly, and the dragon's roar rolled out endlessly. It was the supreme cultivation technique of the Chan monastery of Devanaga. The chant of Devanaga. Right now she was so dignified. She was clearly still the outstanding disciple he had high hopes for, or even the successor of the Bodhisattva. Her white monk robes drifted about, and she no longer gave off the slightest sense of blasphemy. The chant of Devanaga was even more wondrous and filled with zen. Even the monk kings could not help but admire her. One will, oh one will, why do you insist on going your own way, abandoning yourself to depravity? Littleton was speechless. The Grand Master staggered back 5 or 6 steps, and spat out a mouthful of blood. He stared at Littleton in disbelief, but the dragon's roar still refused to let him go. Instead, it grew louder and louder, like a rope slowly tightening around him. He basically could not breathe. A woman's graceful, pleasant voice rang out from behind. I've come to assist you, fellow. It was like the sound of nature in his ears. A noble woman with long, flowing hair held a pipa carved from green jade. She looked at Little and said, the chant of Devanaga really does live up to its reputation. Come and try out my school of music's wondrous sound as well. She plucked the strings gently, and there was a clang, cutting through the dragon's roar like a sharp blade. The Grand Master eased up inside and clasped her hands. Thank you, fellow. I'll play the ambush from 10 sides to liven things up for you all. Kill these 2 demons quickly. The Grand Master of the School of Music smiled and plucked the strings even more frantically. Her hands left behind a series of blurs, as if she had sprouted thousands of hands in that instant. There was the noise of the large strings twanging, the small strings cutting, the cavalry charging forward, and the clang of blades and spears. The invisible music rushed towards Li Qingshan and Little, and like an army. Suddenly, there was a flash beside her. Her dress drifted about, and a gloomy voice rang out by her ear. Who do you want to kill? Your Highness. Don't. She raised her head and met the Dark Queen's cold gaze, before seeing the Myriad Ghost banner in her hand. With a wave of the Myriad Ghost banner, the wails and wails of 10,000 ghosts rang through the grand hall, drowning out the surging music. The army had all been reduced to ghosts. The Grand Master of the School of Music was sent flying, colliding heavily against the glistening wall. The strings snapped one by one. Dark Queen. The Grand Master glared at her furiously. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.